You step into the small stone chamber above the gate just as the last smear of dusk fades from the western slit window, relieving the evening guard with a quiet nod. He gathers his leather water flask and his worn gloves from the ledge, and the two of you exchange the briefest glance of recognition, the kind that passes between men who share a duty but never a conversation. His footsteps retreat down the spiral stair, each soft scuff growing fainter until the only sound is the settling of the tower around you and the distant whisper of the torch outside the gate. The room smells of cold mortar and lamp oil and the wool of your cloak, a combination so familiar that it no longer registers as scent but as the simple fact of being here, unchanged from 1,000 nights before. You settle onto the wooden stool that sits in the corner beside the listening slot, feeling the grain worn smooth by every watchman who sat here before you. Your body knows exactly how to arrange itself, the left foot flat on the flagstone, the right heel hooked on the lower rung, the spine curving just enough to rest the shoulder blades against the cold stone wall without pressing hard. You let your breathing slow until it matches the faint pulse of the candle flame on the ledge, a tiny orange teardrop that wavers but never quite goes out. The candle is a new one, tall and straight, and it will still be burning when your relief arrives, though it will have shrunk by half. That small measurement of time sits in the back of your mind without demanding attention, like a quiet hourglass made of wax and wick. For a long while you simply exist in the stillness. The gatehouse becomes a world complete unto itself, a rectangle of heavy silence defined by 4 stone walls and a timbered roof that creaks now and then as the night chill tightens the beams. You are aware of the weight of your own boots on the flagstones, the way the leather soles press against the uneven surface and find their balance without your having to think about it. The wool of your cloak traps the warmth of your body, and that warmth spreads slowly through the layers of tunic and undershirt until you feel neither hot nor cold, just settled. Your hands rest on your thighs with the palms turned slightly upward, a posture of waiting that has become as natural as breathing. The darkness outside the arrow slit is complete now. When you turn your head to look, you see nothing but a deep blue-black that erases the line between the earth and the sky, a single expanse of absence that stretches from the base of the wall to the farthest star. There is no moon tonight, which means the road will stay invisible until dawn, and anyone walking upon it would have to carry a lantern or trust their feet to the memory of the way. You know that no one will be walking, because no one has walked this road at midnight in all the years you have kept this watch. The knowledge is not a disappointment or a relief, it is simply the shape of the truth, smooth and round and untroubled. The candle flame bends slightly as a thread of outside air finds its way through the listening slot, carrying with it the cool breath of the open countryside. That air holds the scent of dry grass and distant wood smoke, and the faint mineral tang of the stream that runs along the base of the outer wall. You breathe it in without hurry, letting it fill the bottom of your lungs before you release it in a slow exhale that condenses into a ghost of mist and disappears. The cycle repeats itself, in and out, a rhythm that asks nothing of you except that you continue. Your mind drifts to the fields that lie beyond the gate, the barley stubble silvered by starlight, the furrows running straight toward the dark mass of the forest, and you see them without seeing them, the way you see your own hands in a dark room. Time passes in small measured units defined only by the slow shift of your weight on the stool and the occasional rustle of your tunic as you tilt your head toward the listening slot. You do not count the minutes because there is no need to count them. The watch will end when it ends, and until then you are exactly where you are supposed to be. The idea of being somewhere else, of lying in a warm bed or standing by a hearth, crosses your mind like a leaf floating on a stream, visible for a moment and then gone. You do not chase it, you do not hold on to it, you simply notice it and return to the stillness of the stone room. Your eyes wander across the familiar shapes that fill the chamber. The arched ceiling above you is blackened with the soot of old torches long since replaced by the candle, and the soot forms patterns that you have traced 100 times, a map of shadows that never changes. The bracket on the wall holds a signal horn, a curled length of ox horn with a brass mouthpiece that has not been used in living memory, its surface dulled by dust. Below it, on a wooden peg, hangs a spare cloak left by some previous guard, so old that the wool has felted into a single stiff sheet that nobody bothers to move. The door to the stairwell stands slightly ajar, a dark rectangle within a dark wall, and beyond it the steps spiral down into the guardroom where the off-duty men sleep on straw pallets, their breathing a distant murmur that does not reach this high. You turn your attention to the great iron hinges of the gate door below, though you cannot see them from where you sit. You know they are there. Massive black iron straps bolted through oak beams as thick as a man's waist, their pins set deep into the stone. You can picture the way the metal sweats in cold weather, tiny beads of moisture that gather on the surface and drip slowly onto the threshold. You can picture the heavy crossbar seated in its iron cradles, the grain of the oak darkened by centuries of hands pushing it into place. These images fill your mind without urgency, a slow inventory of things that exist whether you think of them or not, and there is a comfort in that, in knowing that the gate is solid and closed and will remain so until the first light. The stool creaks softly as you shift your weight, a sound so small that it barely registers, and you feel the flagstone under your left foot, cold even through the leather sole. You press down slightly, testing the solidity of it, and the stone does not move. It has not moved for 400 years, and that certainty travels up through your leg and into your spine. You let your jaw relax so that your teeth part just enough to stop the faint click that happens when they meet, a small adjustment that makes the silence inside your own head even deeper. The strap of your helm rests gently under your chin, the leather worn to a softness that cups your skin without pressure, and the weight of the iron cap has become so familiar that you no longer distinguish it from your own body. Outside, the torch fixed in the iron sconce on the outer wall continues its quiet work. You can see the edge of its light through the arrow slit, a warm smear of amber that paints the stone arch of the gate and reveals the pitted surface of the iron studs on the door. The flame bends and straightens, pushed by a breeze that is too gentle to feel, but strong enough to make the light dance. The smell of burning pitch drifts in, mixing with the mossy dampness of the outer wall, and you let it remind you that you are still exactly where you are supposed to be, a listener placed at the threshold like a stone in a stream. Your thoughts grow loose and easy as the first hour passes, drifting from the barley fields to the memory of the lane that bends past the old oak, the one with the split trunk that the village children climb in summer. You remember the feel of the sun on your neck during daylight patrols, the dust rising from the road with each step, the way the heat shimmered above the stones and made the distant tower seem to float. The memory is warm and distant and without weight, and it fades as gently as it came, leaving behind only the calm certainty that the sun will rise again and the road will be dusty again, and the children will climb the oak again. For now, there is only the night and the stillness and the slow curl of wax trickling down the iron candle holder. You become aware of a faint sound, a soft creak that repeats at long intervals, and you identify it as the timber roof contracting in the cold. The sound arrives, holds its shape, and fades back into the great quiet, like a stone dropped into a deep well. A moment later, you hear the minute scurry of a mouse in the thatch above, a tiny scratching that lasts only a second or two, and then stops, leaving the silence even deeper than before. You note these sounds without alarm, without even interest, the way you might note the shapes of clouds if you were lying on your back in a meadow. They are simply the voice of the gatehouse, speaking to itself in the dark. Beneath the stone floor, you know there is a culvert where water from the hillside seeps through a channel and trickles down to the stream. You can hear it now, a distant liquid note that never quite stops, a continuous low murmur that forms the foundation of all the other sounds. The water's been running through that culvert since the gatehouse was built, and it will still be running long after you and your replacement and his replacement are gone, a quiet constancy that puts your own watch into a larger perspective. You lean your temple against the cold stone pillar beside the listening slot and feel your own heartbeat, a low and steady thump that blends with the trickle of the culvert and the far-off hoot of an owl counting out its territory across the fallow fields. You realize you have been counting the owl's intervals without meaning to, matching them to the rhythm of your thumb rubbing along the seam of your glove. The pattern is a simple one: 4 hoots, a pause, 4 hoots, a pause, and your thumb moves in small circles against the stitching, a motion so automatic that it happens below the level of thought. The owl is somewhere in the wood beyond the barley field, perched on a dead branch of the old hornbeam, and you picture it as clearly as if you were standing beneath a tree at noon. Its call is not a warning or a question. It is simply the sound an owl makes when the night is deep and the hunting is good, a sound that asks for nothing and expects no answer. You let your eyes close for a moment, not because you are tired, but because the darkness behind your eyelids is no different from the darkness in the room. When you open them again, nothing has changed. The candle still burns, the torch still flickers, the road is still empty. The sameness of it wraps around you like a second cloak, and you settle deeper into the stool, feeling the small ache behind your knees that you know will dissolve the moment you stand. That ache is a familiar companion, a reminder that your body is still awake and still on duty, and you accept it without resistance, letting it become just another part of the landscape of the watch. The second hour passes in the same way the first one did, without hurry and without event. Your mind wanders to the contents of the small leather pouch on your belt, the piece of hard cheese and the heel of bread that you will eat when the candle has burned down, to the mark you scratched into the wax with your thumbnail. You are not hungry yet, but the thought of the food sits pleasantly in the back of your awareness, a small anticipation that requires no action. The cheese will taste of salt and old milk, the bread will be dry and crumbly, and you will eat them slowly while looking out through the arrow slit at the stars that have now become visible in the narrow rectangle of sky. You tilt your head back slightly and find the stars through the slot. There is the constellation you always look for first, the one the old arms master called the wagon. Its 4 corner stars forming a rectangle, and its shaft curving away to the north. The wagon has moved since you first sat down, creeping upward from the middle of the slot to a point near the top, and by the end of your watch it will have climbed out of sight entirely. That slow migration is the only clock you need, more reliable than the candle and more beautiful, a great silent mechanism made of light and distance. You watch it without watching it, letting the faint diamond of sky become just another part of the quiet composition. Your breathing has grown so steady that you can no longer hear it, and for a stretch of time you forget that you are breathing at all. The air moves in and out of your lungs with the same unthinking regularity as the water running through the culvert, and you become aware of this only when a slight catch in your throat causes a soft cough that breaks the rhythm. The cough sounds loud in the small room, and you listen to its echo die away, a brief disturbance that the silence absorbs and neutralizes. You swallow once and the catch is gone, and the rhythm resumes as if it had never been interrupted. The cold has deepened enough that you draw your cloak a fraction tighter, a motion so slight it barely disturbs the pool of stillness you have built around yourself. The wool slides across your shoulders and settles into a new arrangement, trapping a fresh layer of warm air close to your skin. Your left hand finds the hilt of the short sword at your belt, not because you expect to draw it, but because the leather-wrapped grip is a familiar shape under your fingers, a solid object in a world of shadows and sounds. The sword has been at your side for so many years that it feels like an extension of your arm, and you do not think of it as a weapon so much as a tool whose primary function is to hang quietly in its scabbard. You consider the road again, the pale ribbon of packed earth and gravel that you cannot see but know stretches straight for a mile before curving into the wood. In your mind you walk its length, past the milestone with the worn inscription that nobody can read anymore, past the ditch where the thistles grow thick in summer, past the boundary stone that marks the end of the Lord's Demesne. You know the feel of every dip and rise from years of daylight patrols, the spot where the ground gets muddy after rain, the place where the blackthorn bushes overhang the verge and snag at your sleeve. Now in the dark you reconstruct it, stone by stone, your imagination doing the walking so your body can remain motionless on the stool. The road does not expect anyone at this hour. It simply exists as a long quiet thread connecting one sleeping place to another. The village behind you, with its darkened cottages and shuttered windows, the manor house ahead with its great iron gates and its silent courtyard. Between them lies the emptiness of fields and hedgerows and the slow breathing of cattle sleeping on their feet. You are the single point of wakefulness along its length, and there is a quiet pride in that, not a loud pride, but a soft one. The kind that comes from doing a necessary thing that no one will ever see or thank you for. A small sound draws your attention back to the chamber, the faintest whisper of the candle flame guttering as a drip of wax runs down the side and pulls on the iron holder. You watch the wax harden from liquid amber to solid cream, a transformation that takes only seconds, and you think about all the wax that has burned in this room, all the tallow and beeswax and rushlights that have illuminated the faces of guards who are now dust. The thought is not morbid, it is simply a recognition of continuity. The long chain of watchmen stretching back into the past and forward into the future, each one sitting on this same stool and listening to these same stool and listening to these same sounds. Your mind drifts to the old arms master again, the man who taught you how to stand still for hours without locking your knees, how to breathe so that your breath would not fog the cold air and give away your position, how to press your ear to the ground and feel for the vibration of distant hooves. He had a voice like gravel rolling in a wooden bucket, and he would repeat the same lessons over and over until they sank into your bones, and now you carry those lessons without having to recall them. They are simply part of the way you inhabit your body. You remember his face, the deep lines around his mouth, the way he would squint into the sun and say that patience is not a virtue, but a skill, something you practice until it becomes a reflex. You have practiced it so long now that you cannot remember a time when you were impatient. The candle has burned down to the mark you scratched in the wax, and you reach for the leather pouch on your belt with a movement so slow it barely disturbs the air. You take out the piece of hard cheese and the heel of bread, and you eat them in small bites, chewing each mouthful thoroughly before swallowing. The cheese is sharp and crumbly, the bread is dense and slightly stale, and together they taste exactly as you expected them to taste. You brush the crumbs from your tunic and take a sip of water from the flask that hangs beside the pouch, the water cool and metallic from the tin spout. When you have finished, you return the flask to its place and wipe your fingers on the hem of your cloak, and then you are still again, as if the small meal had never happened. The third hour of the watch begins without ceremony. The stars continue their slow procession, the torch continues its dance, the culvert continues its murmur. You notice that the ache behind your knees has spread slightly to your lower back, a dull pressure that you ease by straightening your spine and rolling your shoulders once. A single slow rotation that produces a soft pop somewhere near your shoulder blade. The pop is satisfying in a small way, and you settle back into the stool with your body arranged slightly differently, the left foot now flat on the floor and the right heel resting on the toe of your boot. The new position is just as comfortable as the old one, or just as uncomfortable. It is hard to tell the difference anymore. You think about the village waking up in a few hours, the first smoke curling from the chimneys, the first voices calling across the yards, the first creak of the well handle as someone draws water for the morning porridge. You will be off duty by then, walking down the steps into the grey morning light, your cloak damp with dew and your eyes heavy but not tired. You will eat a bowl of porridge yourself in the guardroom, sitting on the bench by the cold hearth, and then you will climb the narrow stairs to the sleeping loft and lie down on the straw pallet that still holds the shape of your body from the night before. The thought of that pallet, of the rough blanket and the straw pillow, is the most luxurious thing you can imagine, and you let it sit in your mind like a promise that does not need to be kept yet. For now, there is only the listening. You turn your head slightly so that your ear is directly aligned with the listening slot, and you let the sounds of the outside world come to you unfiltered. The night is so quiet that you can hear the rustle of a fox moving through the undergrowth at the edge of the wood, a soft padding of paws on dry leaves that lasts for 10 or 12 steps and then stops. You can hear the wind stirring the topmost branches of the oak, a sound like distant surf that rises and falls in long, slow waves. You can hear the stream at the base of the wall, a continuous low note that underlies everything, the same note it has been singing since the first stone was laid. None of these sounds are footsteps. None of them are the creak of leather, or the jingle of harness, or the muffled cough of a man trying to hide his presence. The enemy that might come remains an idea so distant it cannot disturb the steady field of your attention, and you let the idea drift away into the same darkness that swallows the road and the fields and the wood. What remains is the simple act of being here, of occupying this small stone room at this particular moment in the long history of the Gatehouse, a single point of consciousness in a vast and sleeping landscape. The gate remains closed, the road remains empty, and you remain exactly where you are supposed to be. A listener placed at the threshold like a stone in a stream, as patient and as silent as the stones themselves. Your eyes adjust to the gloom without any conscious effort. a slow transformation that happens on its own while you sit motionless on the wooden stool. At first the chamber was a single dark mass, an absence of light so complete that the walls and the ceiling and the floor seemed to merge into one undifferentiated substance. But now that substance begins to separate into layers. The stone wall opposite the arrow slit reveals itself as a slightly paler grey than the corners, its surface marked by the faint rectangular outline of the door to the stairwell, a shape within a shape that your mind recognizes before your eyes do. The ceiling arches overhead like the inside of a barrel cut in half. The curve defined by the faintest line with a soot-blackened stone meets the cleaner stone of the walls, and you trace that line without moving your head, letting your gaze follow it from one side of the room to the other, as if it were a path laid out for this very purpose. The bracket holding the unused signal horn emerges from the darkness next, a black iron shape that juts from the wall with a solidity that seems to defy the shadows around it. The horn itself curls downward from the bracket, its surface catching a hint of the candle's glow and turning it into a soft brown gleam that is not quite a reflection, more like a memory of light stored in the polished ox horn. You know every inch of that horn, even though you have never used it and never will. The brass mouthpiece turned green with age, the leather thong knotted around the narrow end, the fine cracks that run along the curve like the veins on a dried leaf. None of this is new. None of it is surprising. It is simply the shape of the horn becoming visible again as your eyes complete their slow accommodation to the dark. Below the horn on its wooden peg, the abandoned cloak takes on a presence that it lacked in the deeper blackness of the first hour. Now you can see its outline, a stiff bell shape of felted wool that hangs in rigid folds, and you can almost make out the hood that has fused into a single solid curve. The cloak has hung there for so many years that dust has settled into its fibers and become part of its substance, and the man who left it is no longer a name or a face in anyone's memory. You think about him occasionally during these long watches, not with curiosity, but with a kind of distant kinship, the same way you might think of a previous occupant of your cottage when you notice the worn hollow in a doorstep that your own feet did not create. The cloak is a quiet monument to someone who once sat on this same stool and listened to this same silence, and then one day walked down the stairs and never came back, leaving only the wool and the dust and the patient shape of his absence. The great iron hinges of the gate door below cannot be seen from where you sit, yet they are as present in your mind as any visible object. You picture them with the clarity of long familiarity, the massive straps of black iron, bolted through oak beams thicker than a man's waist, the pins set so deep into the stone that pulling them out would require the strength of a team of oxen. You know the way the metal sweats in cold weather, tiny beads of moisture that gather on the surface and grow heavy until they drip slowly onto the threshold. Each drop a small punctuation in the long sentence of the night. The crossbar seated in its iron cradles is a beam of oak, so heavy that it takes two men to lift it, its grain darkened by centuries of hands pushing it into place, hands that belonged to men who wore the same wool cloak and carried the same short sword and looked out through this same arrow slit at a darkness that has not changed in any measurable way. Outside the arrow slit, the world is a single expanse of deep blue-black without moon, a darkness so complete that the line between earth and sky dissolves. When you first looked out an hour ago, there was still a faint bruise of purple low on the western horizon, the last memory of the sun, but that has faded now, and there is nothing left except a uniform depth of color that might as well be the inside of a closed eye. The stars have not yet appeared, or if they have, they are too faint to pierce the heavy darkness that sits over the countryside like a blanket made of cold air and silence. You know that the road is out there, and the barley field and the dark mass of the forest, but you cannot see any of them, and that absence of visible landmarks creates a curious sensation of floating, as if the gatehouse itself has been lifted free of the earth and suspended in a void where direction and distance have no meaning. The darkness is not empty, however. It is full of texture and depth, once you give it enough time to reveal itself. The blackness near the ground is slightly denser than the blackness higher up, a subtle gradient that your eyes register without your mind needing to interpret it. The silhouette of the merlon beside the arrow slit cuts a sharper edge against the sky than it does against the earth, a crisp line where the stone ends and the vast nothing begins. You notice these differences the way you notice the grain in a piece of wood, without assigning them any importance, simply letting them be part of the total picture that the darkness is painting for you. The longer you look, the more you see, not because the light is increasing, but because your perception is deepening, sinking into the dark like a stone sinking into a pond and finding that the water has layers after all. You breathe in the cool air that threads through the arrow slit and across your face, a narrow stream of movement that carries the scent of frost and dry grass and the faint mineral tang of the stream below. The air is cold enough that it stings the inside of your nostrils on the first inhale, a brief sharpness that fades as the air warms inside you, and when you exhale, a small cloud of condensation forms in front of your lips before vanishing almost instantly. You note the way the cloud appears and disappears, a tiny ghost of your own breath that lives for less than a second, and you find yourself watching for it on the next exhale, a small, predictable event in a world of stillness. The rhythm of breathing becomes a gentle tide, the cool air coming in and the warm mist going out, and after a while you stop noticing it altogether, the way a fisherman stops noticing the sound of the sea. Time passes in small measured units defined only by the slow shift of your weight on the stool and the occasional rustle of your tunic as you tilt your head toward the listening slot. You do not count the minutes because there is no clock in the gatehouse and no bell tower within hearing distance. Only the candle burning steadily downward and the stars that have not yet appeared. The absence of a timepiece is not a lack, but a freedom. It releases you from the obligation to measure your experience against an external standard and allows you to exist entirely within your own internal rhythm. One moment flows into the next without a seam, and you could not say with any certainty whether you have been sitting here for 10 minutes or for an hour, because both would feel exactly the same. Your mind does not empty itself during these long stretches, contrary to what you might have expected when you first took up this duty many years ago. Instead, the thinking happens on its own, a gentle drift of half-formed images that rise and fall like the surface of a calm lake, stirred by an invisible breeze. You find yourself picturing the barley field just beyond the gate, not as it is now in the dark, but as it was last summer, the pale gold of the ripe grain rippling in long waves when the wind swept down from the hills. You see the way the light caught the edges of the stalks and made them glow as if they were lit from within, the way the shadows pulled in the furrows between the rows, the way the whole field seemed to breathe in time with the gusts. The image is so clear that you can almost smell the dry sweetness of the barley, a scent that fills your memory, if not your nostrils. From the barley field your thoughts wander to the lane that bends past the old oak, the one with the split trunk that the village children climb in summer. You know every twist of that lane, the place where the hedgerow thins out and you can see across the pasture to the manor house, the place where the ground dips and a shallow puddle forms after rain, the place where the blackthorn bushes overhang the verge and catch at your sleeve if you walk too close. You walk the lane now in your imagination, feeling the packed earth under your feet, hearing the buzz of insects in the hedgerow, seeing the dapples of sunlight that fall through the leaves and shift with every breeze. The walk is peaceful and without purpose, a simple meander through a landscape that exists entirely inside your head, and it carries you further away from the cold stone room without ever requiring you to leave it. The old oak itself stands at the bend, its trunk split by lightning a century ago, so that it now forms two great halves that lean away from each other like a pair of dancers frozen mid-step. You stood beneath that oak in every season, watching the buds appear in spring, and the leaves unfurl in summer, and the acorns drop in autumn, and the bare branches blacken with rain in winter. The children will climb it again when the warm weather returns, their bare feet finding the familiar holds in the bark, their voices carrying across the field as they call out to each other from the high branches. You think about those children without any particular emotion, simply acknowledging that they exist and that the oak will still be there for them when the sun comes back, the same way it has always been there. Your thoughts drift further now, touching on other images that pass through your mind like clouds, the flock of sheep that grazes the eastern pasture, the smoke rising from the village chimneys on a cold morning, the sound of the blacksmith's hammer ringing out from the forge, the taste of the ale at the inn on market day. Each image lingers for a moment and then fades, replaced by another, and none of them demand your attention or provoke any strong feeling. They are simply the contents of a life, the accumulated memories of a man who has spent most of his days within a few square miles of this gatehouse, and they float through the darkness with the gentle persistence of leaves on a slow river. All of this is wrapped in the patient knowledge that nothing will arrive. The enemy whose footsteps you were theoretically listening for has not been seen in this valley for generations, and the likelihood of an attack tonight is so small that it barely qualifies as a possibility. You are not here because danger is expected. You are here because a gate requires a guard in the same way that a candle requires a wick. As a matter of form and tradition and quiet continuity, the watch must be kept even when there is nothing to watch for. And there is a strange satisfaction in that, a sense of doing something that matters precisely because it is so utterly uneventful. You shift your weight again, and the stool gives its familiar soft creak, a sound that has punctuated your watches for so long that you would miss it if it stopped. Your left foot has grown slightly numb from pressing against the flagstone, so you lift it just enough to restore the circulation, feeling the faint tingle as the blood returns to your toes. You set the foot down again in a slightly different spot, an inch to the left of where it was before, and the new position feels as natural as the old one. The flagstone cold and solid and unchanging. The small adjustment is enough to refresh your awareness of your body, and you take a moment to scan yourself from head to toe, checking for any tension that might have accumulated without your noticing. Your shoulders are relaxed, your hands are loose on your thighs, your jaw is unclenched, and the strap of your helm rests gently against your chin, with the softness of something that has been shaped by years of use. The weight of the iron cap on your head is a constant presence that you no longer interpret as weight. It has become part of the architecture of your body, no more noticeable than the weight of your own skull. You breathe in again, and the cool air fills your lungs, and the cloud of condensation appears and vanishes, and the darkness outside the arrow slit remains as deep and as patient as it was an hour ago. The gatehouse settles around you with a low creak of contracting timber, a sound so familiar that it does not interrupt the flow of your thoughts. The mouse in the thatch above you stirs briefly and then falls silent, and the drip of water from the culvert continues its slow metronome. Each drop a small quiet note in the symphony of the night. You are aware of all these sounds without listening to them actively, the way you are aware of your own breathing, and together they form a background that is as comforting as the hum of a spinning wheel in a cottage hearth. The silence is not an absence of sound, but a presence of small sounds, a texture woven from many threads, and you are suspended in it like a fish suspended in still water. You think about the candle again, the small flame that has been burning since you lit it at the start of your watch. The wax has pooled around the wick and is beginning to overflow the edge of the holder, a slow drip that hardens into a white cascade on the iron. You will need to trim the wick soon, not because the flame is smoking, but because the tallow burns more evenly when the wick is short. A small piece of maintenance that will occupy your hands for a few seconds. You reach for the small iron snuffer that hangs on a hook beside the candle, but then you pause because the flame is still burning cleanly and there is no urgency. The snuffer remains where it is, and your hand returns to your thigh, and the candle continues its quiet work of turning wax into light and warmth. The darkness outside has deepened even further, if such a thing is possible, or perhaps it is simply that your eyes have grown so accustomed to the gloom that the contrast between inside and outside has sharpened. The arrow slit is now a rectangle of absolute black, a void cut into the stone, and the faint amber glow of the torch on the outer wall barely penetrates it. You can see the torchlight as a soft smear at the very edge of the opening, a suggestion of warmth that does not reach the road or the field or the sky, and you know that the torch is still burning because you can smell the pitch, that thick resinous scent that drifts in whenever the breeze shifts. The torch will burn for another few hours before it needs to be replaced, a task that falls to the guard who walks the wall walk on the other side of the gate, and you will hear his footsteps when he comes, the soft tread of a man who is as accustomed to the dark as you are. You let your eyes close, not because you are tired, but because there is no difference between the darkness behind your eyelids and the darkness in the room. When you open them again, the chamber is exactly the same, the horn on its bracket, the cloak on its peg, the arched ceiling with its soot-blackened stones, the door to the stairwell standing slightly ajar. The sameness is comforting. It tells you that the world has not changed while your eyes were shut, that the gate is still closed and the road is still empty, and the night is still doing what nights do. You could close your eyes 100 times and the chamber would still be waiting for you when you open them, as constant as the stones themselves, as reliable as the stream that runs beneath the wall. Your thoughts turn to the morning, though it is still many hours away. The first light will appear as a faint grey wash low on the eastern horizon, a dilution of the black into a deep charcoal that you will sense before you see. The stars will fade one by one, beginning with the faintest and ending with the brightest, and the silhouette of the forest will emerge from the darkness like a continent rising from a receding sea. The rooster at the farmstead down the lane will crow, a sound that carries surprisingly far in the still air, and the first smoke will curl from the village chimneys, and the world will begin its slow rotation from sleep to waking. You will still be here when that happens, though your watch will be nearly over, and you will carry the memory of this long darkness with you as you walk down the stairs into the grey morning. For now there is only the shape of the darkness and the quiet certainty of your own presence within it. You are a listener, a watcher, a single point of consciousness suspended in a sea of night, and the hours stretch out before you like a road that you have walked 1,000 times. Nothing will happen, and you know it, and the knowing is a kind of peace, a deep stillness that settles into your bones and becomes indistinguishable from the silence itself. Without strain, you begin to separate the night into its constituent sounds, a slow process of listening that does not require effort so much as a gentle redirection of attention. The gatehouse is never truly silent, though at first it seemed so when you climbed the stairs and settled onto the stool. But that initial impression of absolute quiet was simply the ear's way of adjusting to a new register. Now, with your body still, and your breathing steady, and your mind adrift on its own calm currents, the smaller sounds emerge one by one, as if they had been waiting all along for you to notice them. You do not reach out to grasp them. You simply let them come, each arriving in its own time and at its own volume. And the inventory unfolds naturally, a catalogue of tiny events that together compose the long night. The first sound to separate itself from the general hush is the soft creak of the timber roof contracting in the chill. It happens not continuously, but at long intervals, a slow groan that seems to come from the beams directly above your head, the ancient oak adjusting its fibers as the temperature drops another fraction of a degree. The sound begins as a low murmur, builds to a brief peak that is never loud enough to startle, and then fades back into the silence, with the gradualness of a wave withdrawing from a shingle beach. You have heard this creak so many times that it no longer registers as a separate event, but as part of the breathing of the gatehouse, a reminder that even stone and timber are alive in their own slow way. Between one creak and the next, there is a pause long enough to lose count, and you never quite know when the next one will come, a small uncertainty that keeps the sound from becoming monotonous. Beneath the roof timber, a much smaller sound begins to make itself known, a minute scurry in the thatch above the ceiling boards, the pattering of a mouse moving through its narrow tunnels. The mouse travels in short bursts, a quick series of scratches that lasts only a second or two before stopping, and in the silence that follows, you can almost feel the tiny creature pausing to sniff the air with its whiskers twitching. Then the scratching resumes in a different spot, a few inches to the left, and you track its progress without moving your head, picturing the small grey body squeezing between the bundled reeds, its claws finding purchase on the rough fibers. The mouse is a permanent resident of the gatehouse, or perhaps one of a long line of mice that have lived in this thatch since it was first laid, and its presence is as much a part of the watch as the candle or the stool. You do not begrudge it the crumbs it must surely find somewhere, the tiny scraps of bread and cheese that have fallen from the meals of 100 guards, and you listen to it scurry with the same detached affection you might feel for a familiar landmark on a daily walk. From outside the arrow slit, a new layer of sound drifts in, the distant trickle of water seeping through the culvert beneath the wall. This sound is continuous, a low liquid murmur that never quite stops, the voice of the stream that runs along the base of the outer fortification on its way to join the larger brook in the valley. The culvert is a stone channel built into the foundation, designed to let the hillside runoff pass through without undermining the wall, and the water has been flowing through it for centuries, smoothing the stones and wearing a dark stain into the mortar. You can hear the trickle most clearly when you tilt your head slightly toward the floor, where the sound seems to rise through the flagstones and enter your awareness from below, a constant soft note that forms the baseline beneath all the other noises. Sometimes the trickle quickens for a few seconds, perhaps when a small stick or a clot of leaves shifts in the channel and releases a temporary blockage, and then it settles back into its regular rhythm, a liquid clock that measures nothing but its own persistence. Above the trickle and the creak in the mouse, layered into the middle distance, you begin to detect the faint voice of the wind as it moves across the open countryside beyond the gate. The wind is not strong tonight. It is barely a breeze, but even a gentle movement of air creates sound when it passes over the uneven surface of the earth. You hear it as a soft sigh that rises and falls in long, slow waves, the kind of sound you might make if you were trying to soothe a restless child. A shushing that has no beginning and no end. The wind combs through the bare branches of the oak on the lane and produces a dry rattle, a sound like paper being crumpled far away, and then it moves on to the barley stubble and whispers through the stiff stalks with a slightly higher note. Each surface gives the wind a different voice, and you can almost map the landscape by these variations. The rougher sound of the hedgerow, the smoother sound of the open field, the near silence where the ground dips into a hollow, sheltered from the breeze. Your own body contributes its share to the inventory of small noises, and you become aware of this gradually, as if your heartbeat and your breath and the rustle of your clothing were instruments in an orchestra you had forgotten you joined. When you lean your temple against the cold stone pillar beside the listening slot, a low and steady thump becomes audible, the pulse of blood moving through the vessels close to your ear. The rhythm is slower than you might expect, a calm and deliberate beat that matches the peacefulness of the night, and you count a few measures before losing track, the numbers dissolving into the sensation itself. Your breath adds a softer counterpoint, the gentle in and out of air passing through your nostrils, a sound so close and so constant that you normally filter it out entirely. Now you let it back in, and you notice the slight variation between the inhale, which is almost silent, and the exhale, which carries a faint whisper as the air passes over your upper lip. The wool of your cloak has its own quiet language, a language of tiny friction sounds that speak whenever you shift even slightly on the stool. When you adjust your shoulders, the fabric brushes against itself with a soft hush, and when you resettle your hands on your thighs, the wool whispers against the leather of your gloves. These sounds are so small that a person standing 3 feet away would not hear them, but in the enclosed space of the gatehouse they are as distinct as a spoken word. You have learned over the years to move in a way that minimizes even these tiny disturbances, not because you need to hide your presence, but because stillness has become a habit, a form of courtesy to the silence that surrounds you. Still, the sounds persist at a level below conscious control, the occasional creak of leather as your boot flexes, the faint click of a buckle shifting, and you accept them without irritation, as you accept the creak of the roof and the scurry of the mouse. The inventory continues to expand as the hour deepens, and you realize that you have been hearing the owl for some time without consciously acknowledging it. The call comes from the direction of the wood beyond the barley field, a low and resonant hoot that repeats at intervals so regular they seem almost mechanical. You listen to the sequence. 4 distinct hoots, then a pause, then 4 more, and you notice that the pause is always the same length, as if the owl were counting out the seconds with an internal metronome. The sound carries a long way in the still night air, and you can hear a faint echo bouncing back from the wall of the gatehouse, a ghost of the original call that arrives a fraction of a second later and at a lower volume. The owl is proclaiming its territory, warning other owls to stay away from its hunting ground. But the call does not feel aggressive. It feels like a statement of fact, a simple announcement that this patch of wood and field belongs to a particular bird and will continue to belong to it until the night ends. Between the owl's calls you catch the much fainter sound of a fox moving through the undergrowth at the edge of the wood. The fox is not vocalizing, it is simply walking, and you hear its progress as a soft padding of paws on dry leaves, a delicate crunch that moves in a straight line for 10 or 12 steps and then stops. You imagine the fox pausing to lift its nose to the air, sampling the scents that drift across the field, perhaps catching the smell of the mouse in the thatch or the lamp oil in your chamber. The fox will be moving toward the farmstead, you think, drawn by the scent of the chickens in their coop, though it will find the coop securely latched and the hens locked safely away. because the farmer's wife is careful about such things. The padding resumes after a moment, growing fainter as the fox angles away from the gatehouse and disappears into the deeper darkness of the hedgerow. A new sound arrives from the opposite direction. From the village behind the gate, a sound so faint that you almost miss it. It is the creak of a door hinge, the brief complaint of iron against iron as someone opens or closes a cottage door far down the lane. You cannot tell whose door it is, but you know the cottages by their sounds, just as you know them by their appearances. The way the smith's door groans on a lower note than the weaver's, the way the inn's door swings silently, because the innkeeper oils its hinges every week. This particular creak is a mid-range sound, not unpleasant, and it is followed by the soft thump of the door settling back into its frame, a double beat that echoes once against the nearest building and then fades. Someone has stepped outside briefly, perhaps to check on a sick animal or to relieve themselves in the yard, and you feel a brief flicker of kinship with that unseen person, another soul awake in the deep night, before the creak and the thump dissolve into memory. Your attention drifts back to the gatehouse itself, and you notice a sound that you have been hearing all along, but have never consciously catalogued, the faint hiss and pop of the candle flame on the ledge. The flame is not silent, it produces a continuous soft sizzle as the wax vaporizes around the wick, a sound so high and thin that it borders on the imaginary. Occasionally, a small pocket of air trapped in the wax escapes with a tiny pop, a minuscule explosion that sends a single spark spiraling upward before it winks out. You watch the flame dance in response to these micro-events, a shiver of light that travels from base to tip and back again, and the hiss and the pop become another entry in your growing inventory, a reminder that even the most constant things are full of small variations. The signal horn on its bracket contributes nothing to the soundscape. It is a mute object, but you find yourself imagining the sound it would make if you were to lift it to your lips and blow. The note would be loud and brassy, and it would carry for miles, rolling across the fields and waking every sleeper in the village, and the thought is so incongruous with the stillness of the night that you almost smile. You will never blow the horn, and the horn knows it, and the silence between you is a compact that neither party has any desire to break. The horn remains on its bracket, dust gathering in its brass mouthpiece, and the night remains undisturbed, and that is exactly as it should be. Beneath all these separate sounds, tying them together like a thread running through a string of beads, is the deep subterranean hum of the earth itself. You cannot hear this hum with your ears, not exactly, but you can feel it through the soles of your boots and the stone beneath them, a vibration so low and so constant that it registers as a sensation rather than a noise. The old arms master told you once that the earth is never truly still, that it trembles with the weight of its own turning and the pull of the moon and the movement of water through its deep veins, and you have come to believe him during these long watches. The hum is not a sound you can describe. It is more like the memory of a sound, the echo of something vast and slow that has been going on since before the gatehouse was built and will continue long after it crumbles. It is a comfort, this deep vibration, a reminder that your small watch is part of a much larger rhythm, and you let it settle into your bones like the cold from the flagstones. The mouse in the thatch has fallen silent now. Perhaps it has found a comfortable spot and curled up to sleep, its small body rising and falling with a breath too tiny to hear. The timber roof has not creaked for a long while, as if the temperature has stabilized and the oak has finished its nightly contraction. The trickle of the culvert continues its soft murmur. The owl continues its territorial counting, the wind continues its gentle shushing, and your heartbeat continues its steady thump. All of these sounds layered together into a tapestry that has no center and no edge. You are not listening to any one thing. You are listening to everything at once, and the act of listening has become so complete that you no longer feel like a separate observer. You are one more quiet element in a composition that has no listener and no composer. A single note in a chord that has been sounding since nightfall and will resolve only at dawn. The torch on the outer wall adds its own small contribution, a sound you have been hearing without naming, the occasional sizzle of resin boiling out of the wood and dripping into the flame. Each drop produces a brief hiss, a sharp little sound that cuts through the lower frequencies before being swallowed by the general quiet. You can smell the pitch as well as hear it, that thick and medicinal scent that hangs in the air near the arrow slit. And the smell and the sound together create a full sensory impression of the torch doing its slow work of turning wood into heat and light and ash. You shift your weight minutely, and the stool creaks in response, a sound so integrated into the fabric of the watch that you barely register it. The creak is different from the roof creak. It is higher and shorter, the sound of two pieces of dry wood rubbing together under the pressure of your body. The stool has made this same sound for as long as you have sat on it, and it will make it for the next guard and the next. A small sonic signature that identifies this particular piece of furniture among all the other silent objects in the room. You run your thumb along the seam of your glove, and that produces a tiny scratching sound, the friction of rough leather against rough leather, a sound so intimate that it seems to happen inside your own head rather than in the external world. The owl pauses in its calling, and for a moment the night seems to hold its breath. The silence that follows is not a true silence, because the culvert is still trickling and the candle is still hissing and the wind is still sighing, but the absence of the owl's regular hoot creates a gap in the soundscape that you feel as a slight shift in pressure. Then the owl resumes. 4 hoots, a pause, 4 more, and the gap is filled, and the rhythm reasserts itself as if it had never been broken. You notice that your own heartbeat has become audible again, not because it has changed, but because your attention has cycled back to it. The thump is slightly faster now than it was when you first leaned against the pillar, a difference so small that you might be imagining it, and you let it beat on, without trying to control it. The heart knows its own rhythm, and it will slow down or speed up according to its own mysterious logic, and your only job is to sit here and let it do what it does. The sound of your pulse blends with the trickle of the culvert until you can no longer tell them apart, 2 liquid rhythms that share the same tempo and the same quiet persistence. You have been sitting long enough that the inventory of small noises has become a complete world, a self-contained universe of sound that requires nothing from you except your presence. The enemy whose footsteps you are supposed to be listening for has no place in this world, because the world is already full, occupied by the creak and the scurry and the trickle and the hoot and the hiss and the thump. A footstep would be an intrusion, a violation of the quiet order, and you feel without articulating it that no footstep will come, because the night has already decided what it will contain, and it contains nothing that does not belong to the ancient and patient rhythm of the gatehouse. The torch fixed in the iron sconce on the outer wall has been burning since before your watch began, and it will still be burning when you walk down the stairs into the grey morning, though by then its flame will have shrunk to a small blue flicker licking at the last of the resin. It sits just at the edge of your vision through the arrow slit, not directly in front of you but slightly to the left, so that you must turn your head a few degrees to bring it into full view, a position you have learned to occupy without strain. The flame is a small orange tongue that bends and straightens, pushed by a breeze too gentle to feel, but strong enough to make the light dance against the stone arch of the gate below. You watch it without watching it, the way you watch the candle on the ledge or the stars through the slot, your attention resting on it lightly, like a hand resting on a familiar railing, and the flicker becomes a kind of visual metronome, marking the passage of moments that do not need to be counted. The light from the torch does not reach far into the darkness. It is a modest pool of amber that spills downward from the sconce and spreads across the outer face of the gate, illuminating a rough semicircle of stone and wood. Within that pool, the surface of the gate door reveals itself in all its ancient detail. The heavy oak planks, set edge to edge and bound by the iron straps that you have pictured so often in the dark. The grain of the wood is a map of slow time, long vertical lines that curve and waver according to the growth of a tree that was felled centuries before you were born. Its rings compressed into a dense fabric that has withstood rain and wind and the hands of countless guards pushing it shut at dusk. You can see the places where the grain has opened slightly, tiny cracks that run along the surface like the veins on the back of a hand, and you know that those cracks will close again when the summer humidity returns and the wood swells to fill the gaps. The amber light softens the dark color of the oak, turning it from black to a deep honeyed brown, and the iron straps gleam dully where the torchlight catches their edges, a muted shine that speaks of metal burnished by centuries of use rather than by any deliberate polish. The iron studs that stud the gate door in regular rows catch the light in a different way, each one a small rounded dome that reflects a bright pinpoint of flame surrounded by a halo of shadow. You've counted those studs before, not because the number matters, but because counting is a way of letting the mind settle, and you remember that there are 48 on the left door and 48 on the left, arranged in 8 horizontal rows of 6. The pattern is as familiar as the constellations, a fixed geometry that does not change from night to night, and you trace the rows with your eyes now, moving from left to right and top to bottom, a slow visual inventory that asks nothing of you except your presence. The studs are pitted with age, the surface is rough where the iron has oxidized into a dark crust that flakes away in tiny particles when the door is opened or closed, and some of them are slightly askew, having been hammered into the oak at slight angles by a smith whose name is lost to history. None of these imperfections matter, they are simply part of the gate's long story, and the torchlight reveals them all with the same impartial amber glow. Beneath the studs and the iron straps, at the very edge of the pool of light where the amber fades into shadow, the great crossbar sits in its iron cradles, a beam of oak so heavy that it takes 2 men to lift it from its resting place. The crossbar is a darker shape within the darkness, its outline just barely visible, and you can see the way the wood has been worn smooth at the center, where generations of guards have placed their shoulders against it to slide it home. The ends of the crossbar fit into sockets cut into the stone of the gatehouse walls, deep rectangular holes that you cannot see from where you sit but know are there, and the iron cradles that support the beam are fixed to the door with bolts as thick as your thumb. The torchlight does not reach the sockets or the far ends of the crossbar. It only touches the near end, painting a thin line of gold along the top edge and leaving the rest in shadow, and the effect is of something vast and solid that only partially emerges from the dark, like a whale surfacing briefly before sinking back into the deep. Your thoughts grow loose and easy as you trace the outlines of that familiar geometry, the beam and the brace and the crossbar seated in its cradle. All of it exactly as it was last night and the night before. The gate is a composition of lines and masses, vertical planks and horizontal straps and circular studs and diagonal braces, a design that has stood unchanged since the gatehouse was built, and your mind drifts across its surfaces without urgency, pausing here and there to note a detail that you have noted 1,000 times before. The lower hinge of the right door has a slight gap where the iron has shifted over time, a space no wider than a finger that lets in a sliver of cold air on winter nights, and you can feel that air now as a faint movement against your ankles, a whisper of cold that reminds you of the world outside the walls. The upper hinge of the left door is set deeper into the stone, and its pin is decorated with a simple cross-hatched pattern that the smith cut into the metal while it was still hot, a small flourish that no one notices except a guard with hours to fill. The torch pops once, a tiny liquid sound of resin boiling in the head of the wood, and you glance toward it without moving your head, catching the brief flare of brighter orange that accompanies the pop. The sound is sharp and short, a miniature explosion that sends a tiny shower of sparks spiraling upward, each spark a brief orange dot that curves through the darkness and winks out before it travels more than a hand's breadth from the flame. The pop is followed by a soft hiss as a fresh bead of resin melts and drips into the fire, and the smell of burning pitch drifts in through the arrow slit, that thick medicinal scent that has become so familiar that you no longer register it as smell but as atmosphere, a quality of the air itself. The pitch smell mingles with the mossy dampness of the outer wall, a cool and earthy scent that rises from the stone and the mortar and the small ferns that grow in the cracks near the ground, and together the two scents create a balance, the sharp heat of the torch and the cool moisture of the stone, fire and water held in a single breath of air. You let the smell remind you that you are still exactly where you are supposed to be, a listener placed at the threshold like a stone in a stream, and the thought settles into your mind as gently as a leaf settling onto still water. The torch is a companion of sorts, a silent presence that burns through the night without complaint, and you feel a quiet kinship with it. Two steady things doing their steady work while the world sleeps. The torch does not ask questions or offer opinions, it simply burns and you simply watch, and the relationship is perfect in its simplicity. The flame will keep burning as long as the wood and the resin hold out, and you will keep watching as long as the night holds out, and when the wood is consumed and the night is over, you will both be finished. The torch reduced to ash, and you to a tired man walking down the stairs to his pallet. The amber pool of light on the gate continues its slow dance, the flame bending and straightening, and the shadows shift in response, lengthening and shortening along the edges of the stone arch. The arch itself is a curve of dressed stone that rises above the gate doors in a perfect semicircle, each block cut to fit its neighbors with a precision that still holds after 400 years of frost and thaw. The keystone at the apex of the arch is slightly larger than the others and bears a carved shield that is too weathered to read, its surface smoothed by rain until the device is only a faint suggestion of a shape, perhaps a lion, or a tower, or a sheaf of wheat. The torchlight touches the keystone briefly when the flame bends upward, illuminating the worn carving and then leaving it in shadow again, a glimpse that comes and goes like a memory that surfaces and sinks. You have looked at that shield so many times that you could draw it from memory even though you cannot say what it depicts, and the mystery of it does not trouble you. It is simply another part of the gate's long history, a mark left by someone whose name and purpose have faded into the same dust that coats the abandoned cloak on its peg. Your gaze drifts from the arch to the wall walk above it, the narrow stone pathway that runs along the top of the outer wall and connects the gatehouse to the corner towers. The wall walk is crenellated, a series of merlons and embrasures that give the fortification its familiar toothed silhouette, and you can see the dark gaps of the embrasures where the archers would stand if the gate ever came under attack. There are no archers on the wall walk tonight. There has not been an archer on that wall walk in living memory, but the embrasures remain as a reminder of a purpose that the gatehouse has outlived. The torchlight does not reach the wall walk. It is too high and too far to the side, but you can see the silhouette of the nearest merlon against the starry sky, a solid black rectangle that blocks out a section of the faint glow above the horizon. The merlon is capped with a sloping stone that sheds rainwater, and you can see the faint gleam of moisture on that slope, a dampness that will turn to frost before dawn. You let your eyes return to the torch itself, to the iron sconce that holds it, and the bracket that fixes the sconce to the stone. The sconce is a simple ring of iron, open at the top to allow the torch to be inserted and removed, and its surface is crusted with a residue of old pitch and ash, a rough black coating that has built up over years of use and gives the iron a texture like cooled lava. The bracket is a flat bar of iron bent into an L shape and bolted to the wall with two large rivets, and the rivets are slightly rusted, a fine orange powder that streaks down the stone below them and stains the mortar a pale rust color. You note these details without any particular interest. They are simply the facts of the scene, the way a tree has bark or a river has banks, and noting them is a way of staying present, of anchoring your attention to something solid while the hours pass. The flame bends hard to the left as a stronger gust of wind funnels through the gate passage, and for a moment the amber pool of light stretches into a long oval, reaching almost to the edge of the road before snapping back to its usual circular shape. The gust brings a brief whistle, a low note that sounds in the arrow slit like someone blowing across the mouth of a bottle, and then it is gone, and the flame settles back into its gentle dance. The sound of the gust reminds you of the wind's many voices, the way it hums in the arrow slit, and sighs in the barley stubble, and rattles in the oak branches, and you listen for a moment to see if the gust will return. But it does not. It was a single breath of moving air that came from nowhere and went to nowhere, and the night is still again. The torch has been burning for a long time now, and you can see that the wood just below the flame is beginning to char, turning from brown to black as the fire consumes the outer layers. The charred section is shaped like an hourglass, narrowest just above the iron ring of the sconce, and widening as it rises toward the flame, and it glows with a faint red ember when the flame bends away and exposes the interior. The ember pulses softly, a heartbeat of heat that dims and brightens in time with the flicker, and you watch the pulse without watching it, letting the rhythm blend with the rhythm of the candle on the ledge, and the trickle of the culvert and your own slow pulse against the stone pillar. All of these rhythms are converging now, the torch and the candle and the water and the blood, a slow synchronization that happens on its own, and you feel yourself becoming part of that convergence, a single steady beat in a larger body of time. The light from the torch falls on the road in front of the gate, illuminating a small patch of packed earth and gravel that is otherwise invisible in the darkness. The patch is not large, perhaps 10 feet across, and its edges are blurred where the amber light fades into the black of the open countryside. Within the patch you can see the texture of the road surface, the small stones that have been pressed into the earth by the passage of carts and hooves, the shallow ruts that run parallel to the gate and curve away toward the wood, the scattered bits of dry straw that have fallen from a passing hay wagon. The stones catch the light on their upper surfaces and leave their lower halves in shadow, creating a field of tiny bright points that glitter like a night sky in miniature. You notice that one of the stones, a smooth white pebble, reflects the flame more brightly than the others, and you find yourself returning to it, using it as a fixed point in the shifting pattern of light, a small anchor for your drifting attention. Above the road patch, the darkness resumes its dominion, an unbroken expanse that stretches from the edge of the light to the horizon and beyond. You know that the road continues straight for a mile before curving into the wood, and you know every feature of that unseen mile as well as you know the grain of the gate door. But it is strange to see only this small illuminated circle, and to imagine the rest of the world existing in perfect blackness. The contrast between the lit patch and the surrounding dark creates a sense of enclosure, as if the gatehouse were a small island of light in a sea of nothing, and you find that sensation oddly comforting, the feeling of being contained and protected by the very darkness that you are watching. The torch pops again, a softer sound this time, more of a crackle than a pop, and a curl of pale smoke rises from the flame and drifts sideways through the arrow slit, carrying the pitch smell directly to your face. The smoke is thin and blue-gray, visible only because the torchlight illuminates it from below, and it swirls in the faint draft before dissipating into the larger darkness of the chamber. You watch the smoke without moving your head, following its lazy spiral with your peripheral vision, and you think about all the smoke that has risen from this torch and its predecessors, all the tiny particles that have drifted into the night air and scattered across the countryside, settling on the barley field and the oak leaves and the thatch of the village cottages. The thought is vast and vague, a consideration of the way everything disperses and spreads and becomes part of everything else, and it does not lead anywhere. It simply drifts across your mind the way the smoke drifts across the arrow slit. Your attention returns to the gate door and the pattern of light upon it, and you notice that the torch has burned down enough that the angle of the light has changed slightly, the pool of amber shifting a few inches lower on the oak planks. The change is so gradual that you would not have noticed it if you had not been looking for it, but now you can see that the studs that were brightly lit an hour ago are now in shadow, and a new row of studs has emerged from the darkness at the bottom of the door. The shift is a silent clock, measuring the passage of the night in increments of light and shadow, and you let it register without attaching any significance to it. The torch will continue to sink, the light will continue to descend, and by dawn the flame will be level with the iron cradles of the crossbar, the last of the light pooling on the stone threshold before the torch gutters out and leaves only the grey of morning. You settle deeper into the stool, feeling the familiar pressure of the worn wood against the backs of your thighs, and the small adjustment sends a soft creak through the chamber. The sound blends with the hiss of the candle and the trickle of the culvert and the distant hoot of the owl, and you let the whole composition wash over you. A quiet symphony that has been playing since you sat down and will continue playing long after you leave. The torch on the wall is one instrument among many, its flicker a visual note that accompanies the auditory ones, and you are the single listener, the quiet audience of one who has no need to applaud or respond, only to be present. The gate remains closed, the road remains empty, and the torch burns on, and in the steady amber glow you find a peace as deep and as old as the stones themselves. The road beyond the gate is a pale ribbon of packed earth and gravel that you cannot see but know stretches straight for a mile before curving gently into the wood. You have not laid eyes on it since the last smear of dusk faded from the sky, yet it exists in your mind with a clarity that requires no light, a map drawn from years of walking its length in sun and rain and mist and the flat grey of winter afternoons. Your body remains motionless on the wooden stool, the soles of your boots resting on the cold flankstones, but your imagination has already stepped outside the gate and begun to travel, moving along the familiar surface as easily as breath moves through a sleeping body. The darkness that hides the road from your sight cannot hide it from your memory, and so you set out now on a quiet journey, a slow reconstruction of every stone and dip and curve, a walk that asks nothing of your legs and everything of your attention. The first stretch beyond the gate is a straight line of hard-packed earth that runs between the outer wall and the beginning of the open field. You know this section by the sound it makes underfoot, a firm and slightly hollow thump that echoes back from the stone on one side and disperses into the air on the other. The surface here is a mixture of crushed gravel and dried mud, compacted by the weight of countless carts bringing grain to the mill and wool to the market, and it has the smoothness of something that has been pressed down over centuries until it is as hard as the cobbles in a city street. In daylight, you can see the way the gravel catches the sun, small flecks of quartz and mica that glitter among the duller stones, and you can smell the dust that rises when a horse trots past, a dry and earthy scent that lingers in the back of the throat. Now in the dark, those details are invisible but not absent. They are simply stored in the part of your mind that keeps the world intact while the world sleeps. You walk in your imagination with the slow and steady pace of a patrol, your phantom boots falling one after the other, left and right, a rhythm as old as walking itself. The ground beneath these imagined steps slopes very slightly downward away from the gate, a grade so gentle that a casual walker would not notice it. But you have measured it with your own legs on 1,000 occasions, and you know that the road drops by the height of a man's hand over the first 50 paces. This downward tilt is what keeps rainwater from pooling at the gate, channeling it instead toward the ditch that runs along the left side of the road, a shallow trench that is dry for most of the year and fills only after the heaviest storms. The ditch is a humble thing, no more than a foot deep and 2 feet wide, but it has served its purpose since the road was first laid, and you have a quiet respect for anything that does its work so faithfully for so long. At 100 paces from the gate, the road passes the milestone with the worn inscription that nobody can read anymore. The milestone is a block of grey granite, roughly squared, its top rounded by weather and its sides covered with a pale crust of lichen that spreads in concentric circles like the rings of a tree. The inscription was cut deep into the stone long ago, but wind and rain have smoothed the edges of the letters until they are only shallow depressions, a ghost of a message that might once have told the distance to the nearest market town or the name of the Lord who commissioned the road. You have run your fingers over those depressions on a hot afternoon, tracing the curves and angles, trying to feel the shape of a word that no longer exists, and the stone was warm under your touch and rough where the lichen had not covered it. Now you pass the milestone in the dark without pausing, a silent greeting to an old acquaintance who asks for no reply. Beyond the milestone the road continues straight, and the open field begins to widen on both sides, the barley stubble stretching away into a darkness that your mind fills with remembered gold. The field belongs to the manor, and is planted with barley every spring, the seeds scattered by a man who walks the furrows with a sack over his shoulder and a measured swing of his arm, a motion you have watched from the gatehouse many times. By midsummer, the barley stands waist-high and ripples like the surface of a lake when the wind moves across it, a sound that is not quite a rustle and not quite a whisper, something in between that you can hear even from the arrow slit on a breezeless night. Now in the cold darkness the field is stubble and bare earth, the stalks cut low by the scythes of the harvesters and gathered into sheaves that have long since been carted away to the threshing barn, leaving only the sharp little stumps that catch the moonlight when there is a moon. There is no moon tonight, so you cannot see the stubble or the field or anything beyond the small circle of torchlight at the gate. But you walk past it all the same, your imagined steps keeping time with the slow rhythm of your breathing. The road here is slightly rougher than it was near the gate, the surface broken by the occasional pothole where a cartwheel has jolted through a soft spot after rain, and these potholes are filled now with a mixture of small stones and dry mud that your feet know how to navigate without conscious thought. You pictured the way the gravel crunches under your weight, the larger stones shifting and settling, the smaller ones pressing into the dirt, a sensation so familiar that you can almost feel it through the leather of your boots. The pothole shapes are irregular, some round and some oblong, and you know each one by its position relative to the ditch or the hedgerow or the lone thorn bush that marks the boundary between the barley field and the pasture. The thorn bush is a landmark that you look for every time you walk this road, a gnarled old blackthorn that grows at a slight angle where the field meets the pasture on the right side. Its branches are a tangle of dark twigs and long, sharp spines, and in spring it covers itself with small white flowers that appear before the leaves, a froth of white against the still bare hedgerow, and the scent of those flowers is sweet and faintly almond-like, drifting across the road on warm afternoons. Later in the year, the flowers turn to sloes, hard blue-black fruits that the village women gather to make sloe gin, steeping them in jars with sugar and spirit until the liquid turns a deep ruby color. You have tasted that gin once at the inn on a winter night, and the memory of its warmth and sharpness flickers through your mind now as you pass the invisible thorn bush, a small sensory echo from a different season entirely. Past the thorn bush, the road begins to run alongside the pasture, a large open field where the manor's sheep graze during the day and huddle together at night near the stone wall that divides the pasture from the lane. You cannot see the sheep now. They are dark shapes among darker shapes, motionless mounds of wool that might as well be boulders for all the movement they make. You know they are there, 50 or 60 ewes with their thick winter fleeces, and you know the sound they make when they are disturbed, a low and plaintive bleat that carries surprisingly far in the still air. But they are not disturbed tonight. Nothing has come near them, and they sleep on in their quiet huddle while you walk past them in your imagination, a silent figure on the dark road, noticed only by the one old ewe who always lifts her head when she hears footsteps but does not get up. The road curves for the first time as it leaves the pasture, a gentle bend to the right that follows the contour of a low rise, the first hill of any kind since leaving the gate. The curve is not sharp. It is a long and sweeping arc that you can see the whole length of in daylight, the road unwinding ahead of you like a pale ribbon laid across the green slope. At the apex of the curve there is a slight camber, the road tilting outward by a few degrees to shed rainwater into the ditch, and you have to adjust your stride to compensate, your right foot landing slightly higher than your left. This small adjustment has become so automatic that you no longer notice it in your waking life. But here in the dark of the gatehouse, you notice it in your mind, the phantom shift of weight and balance, the subtle change in the way your hips align with the slope. The body remembers what the mind has long since stopped attending to, and the memory is a kind of quiet wisdom that lives in the bones. After the curve, the road straightens again and enters the long, gradual descent toward the wood, the ground falling away at a steeper angle than before, enough that a cart coming up from the village would need to slow its pace to spare the horse. You've seen the carter's boy leading the shy horse up this slope, the great feathered hooves striking sparks from the stones, the boy's voice low and coaxing as he clicked his tongue and murmured words that only the horse understood. The descent is not difficult on foot, it is just steep enough to make your knees work a little harder and your breath come a little faster if you are walking quickly, but you are not walking quickly in your imagination. You are moving at the same unhurried pace you have kept since you left the gate, a pace that matches the slow turn of the stars and the steady drip of the culvert. The road falls away beneath your phantom feet, and you follow it without resistance, letting the imagined slope carry you deeper into the darkness. At the bottom of the descent, the road crosses a small stream by way of a stone culvert, a simple arch of fitted stones that allows the water to pass beneath without flooding the road. The stream is the same one that flows past the gatehouse, having wound its way down from the hillside and meandered through the pasture, and here it is narrow enough to step across, a bright ribbon of moving water that chatters over the stones in a voice that is higher and faster than the deeper murmur of the culvert under the wall. You pause in your imagined walk to stand on the little stone bridge and listen to the water, the same way you have paused 100 times on daylight patrols, leaning your elbows on the low parapet and watching the ripples catch the sun. The sound is different at night, sharper and clearer, every splash and gurgle defined against the larger silence, and you let the sound fill your mind for a moment before continuing on. Beyond the stream, the road begins to run between hedgerows that grow close on either side, the hawthorn and hazel and blackthorn weaving together into a dense green wall that arches overhead in summer to form a tunnel of leaves. Now in the bare season the hedgerows are skeletal, a lattice of brown twigs and grey branches that would let the moonlight through if there were any moon. But there is only the darkness and the faint sound of wind moving through the gaps. The road here is narrower than it was by the fields, the hedgerows pressing in so that two carts cannot pass without one pulling into a passing place. And you know the exact locations of those wider spots, the places where the ditch widens and the hedge draws back just enough to let the wheels through. You pass the first of these without incident, your phantom shoulders brushing against a phantom branch that you duck under by instinct. A small motion that your real body does not perform, but that your memory enacts perfectly. The hedgerows are full of small life, even in the cold months, the birds that roost in the thickest tangles and the voles that tunnel through the leaf litter at the base, and you hear their tiny rustlings in the undergrowth as you pass. Sounds that are not real, but that your imagination supplies from a storehouse of remembered patrols. A blackbird, startled from its roost, would burst upward with a clatter of wings and a sharp chinking call. But nothing startles it tonight. The blackbird sleeps on, and the hedgerow is still. The stillness is so complete that you can almost feel the weight of it pressing down on the road. A physical presence that muffles every sound and slows every movement, and you move through it like a fish moving through deep water, unhurried and undisturbed. The road leaves the hedgerows and enters the wood at the point where the old boundary stone marks the end of the Lord's Day Menier, a flat slab of sandstone set upright at the side of the road, its front face carved with the same worn device that appears on the keystone of the gate arch. The boundary stone is a marker of jurisdiction, the place where the Lord's direct control gives way to the common land of the village, and you have always felt a slight shift in the atmosphere when you pass it, not a change in the air, but a change in the meaning of the ground beneath your feet. On one side of the stone the land belongs to the manor, on the other side it belongs to the community, and the stone itself is neutral ground, a silent witness to the invisible line it represents. You touch the top of the stone in your imagination, feeling the rough sandstone grain under your palm, the same way you touch it on patrols, a small gesture of acknowledgement that has become a habit. The wood opens around you, the trees drawing back from the road to form a high canopy of bare branches that would filter the sunlight into dappled patterns if the sun were shining. The trees are mostly oak and ash, and the occasional hornbeam, their trunks grey and fissured, and their roots humping up through the leaf litter that carpets the ground on either side of the road. In autumn, this part of the road is thick with acorns that crunch underfoot and slip under the wheels of carts, and the village children come here with baskets to gather them for the pigs. Now in the deep winter night, the acorns are buried under a layer of fallen leaves, and the only sound is the occasional creak of a branch as the cold tightens the wood, a sound that is a larger version of the creak in the gatehouse roof, the same physics playing out on a different scale. You walk deeper into the wood, your phantom footsteps muffled by the imagined leaf litter, and the road begins to curve again, a slow and winding path that follows the contours of the land, rather than cutting through it. This section of the road was not engineered by any lord. It grew organically from the tracks that people and animals made as they moved between the village and the manor, and it has the meandering quality of a path that found its own way rather than being imposed from above. You find this part of the road the most peaceful. The way the curves hide what lies ahead, the way the trees lean in to form a protective tunnel, the way the world narrows to the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. In the darkness of the gatehouse, you follow each curve in your mind, the gentle left bend that leads past the old hornbeam where the owl perches, the shallow right bend that skirts the boggy patch where the marsh marigolds bloom in spring, the long straight section that opens briefly onto a clearing where a charcoal burner's hut once stood. The clearing is empty now, the hut long since collapsed into a mound of rotting timber and moss, but you remember the charcoal burner, an old man with a face creased by smoke, who would wave at you from his doorway as you passed on patrol. He died some years ago, and his hut has been slowly returning to the earth, the way all things built by human hands eventually return. You do not dwell on this. You simply note the clearing as you pass it, the same way you note the milestone and the thorn bush and the boundary stone. A quiet cataloguing of the landmarks that define the road and the landscape and your own long familiarity with both. Beyond the clearing, the road leaves the wood and emerges into the open countryside again, the final stretch that leads to the village. Here the road widens and the surface becomes smoother, maintained by the villagers who use it daily rather than by the manor's workmen, and you can feel the difference in your imagined steps, the way the gravel is finer and more evenly spread, the way the potholes are filled almost as soon as they appear. The village is still asleep. Its cottage is dark and its streets empty, and you do not need to enter it. Your walk is complete. You stand at the edge of the wood in your mind, looking down the gentle slope toward the cluster of roofs that you cannot see, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of having made the journey without ever leaving your stool. The road has not changed. The landmarks are all in their places. The surface is the same surface it has been for years, and the knowledge of this is a deep and steady comfort. You slowly withdraw your attention from the wood and the clearing and the boundary stone, retracing your steps in reverse, the hedgerows and the stream and the pasture and the thorn bush and the milestone and the ditch, until you are back at the gate, back in the small stone chamber with the candle on the ledge and the torch on the wall and the stool solid beneath you. The road is empty and will remain empty, and you have walked it without moving, a quiet circuit of memory that has filled the long hour with the simple geography of a place you know as well as your own breathing. After you have walked the road in your mind and catalogued the small sounds of the gatehouse and watched the torch on the wall for what feels like a long and peaceful stretch of the night, your attention begins to turn inward, drawn not by any external prompt but by the simple gravity of stillness. The body at rest becomes its own landscape, a terrain of small sensations that are always present, but normally lost beneath the noise of movement and task and speech. Here in the silence of the small stone chamber, with the candle burning steadily on the ledge, and the culvert murmuring beneath the floor and the darkness pressing gently against the arrow slit, you have the time and the quiet to notice what is always there, the subtle rhythms and pressures and temperatures that make up the experience of being a living person inside a set of clothes and a suit of gear. The first thing you become aware of, after some indefinite period of sitting, is the slight echo of your own breath inside the rim of your helm. The sound is not loud. It is so soft that you have to turn your attention toward it deliberately, the way you might turn your ear toward a distant voice on a windy day. Once you find it, though, it becomes as clear as any of the other night sounds, a soft, hollow whisper that rises and falls with a rhythm so steady it lulls rather than alerts. Each inhale draws a thin stream of air across the edge of the metal, producing a faint shushing that is higher and drier than the sound of your breath in the open air, and each exhale sends a small warm current back against the iron, a muffled huff that seems to circle inside the confined space before escaping through the gaps around your jaw. The helm is not sealed. It is an open cap of forged iron that sits on the crown of your head and extends down to protect your temples and the back of your neck, and there is plenty of room for air to move in and out. But the shape of the metal creates a small acoustic chamber, a miniature room within the larger room, and in that chamber your breath finds an echo that has no other home. You note the way the air feels warmer when it returns from the metal, a tiny circle of heat that stays close to your mouth and spreads across your upper lip before dissipating into the cooler air of the chamber. The contrast between the warmth of your exhaled breath and the cold of the iron is a small but distinct sensation, a boundary where the living heat of your body meets the unliving chill of the forged metal, and you can feel that boundary as a thin line of temperature that shifts slightly with each breath, warm on the exhale and cool on the inhale. It is a microclimate, a private weather system that exists only inside the helm and only for as long as you sit here breathing, and you let your jaw relax so that your teeth part just enough to stop the faint click that happens when they meet. A small adjustment that makes the silence inside the helm even deeper. The strap under your chin is worn to a softness that cups your skin without pressure, the leather having absorbed the oils from your fingers and the moisture from the air over so many years that it has become pliable and smooth, almost velvety to the touch. You remember when the strap was new and stiff, the edges sharp enough to chafe if you wore the helm for too long, and you remember the day you rubbed tallow into the leather, working it in with your thumbs until the fibers softened and the color deepened from a pale tan to a rich dark brown. That day was years ago, and the strap has been soft ever since, a small comfort that you appreciate without thinking about it, the way you appreciate the smooth grain of the stool or the familiar weight of the cloak on your shoulders. The buckle that fastens the strap is a simple iron loop with a tongue, and it rests against the left side of your jaw, a cool spot of metal that never quite warms to the temperature of your skin, a tiny reminder that the helm is a separate object with its own nature. The weight of the iron cap has become so familiar that you no longer distinguish it from your own body, a sensation that has taken years to develop. When you first began wearing the helm as a young guard, fresh from the training yard and still learning the rhythms of the watch, the weight was a constant presence that you could not ignore, a pressure on the crown of your head that made your neck ache after the first hour, and your shoulders tighten in sympathy. You would find yourself tilting your head forward to relieve the strain, or reaching up to adjust the angle, or simply wishing you could take it off and set it aside. But time and habit have done their slow work, and now the helm sits on your head as naturally as your own hair, its weight distributed so evenly across the leather suspension inside that you feel it not as a burden but as a kind of completeness, a lid that closes the vessel of your body and makes you whole. You would feel strangely light and exposed without it, the same way you would feel if you walked outside without your boots, and the thought of removing it does not occur to you any more than the thought of removing your ears. The suspension inside the helm is a simple arrangement of leather straps that cross the crown of your head, forming a cradle that holds the iron away from your skull by the width of a finger. This gap serves two purposes. It cushions the weight and it allows air to circulate, keeping your head cool in summer and preventing the iron from freezing to your hair in winter. You can feel the straps now as a faint pattern of pressure against your scalp, a network of lines that you have memorized without meaning to. The main strap running from front to back and the two cross straps running from side to side, all of them meeting at a small leather disc at the apex. The disc is the size of a coin, and it bears the impression of the rivet that holds the straps together, a small circle of raised leather that presses gently into the very top of your head. You can feel that circle if you concentrate, a tiny focal point of pressure that is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Simply a point of contact between your body and the thing you wear, and you let your attention rest on it for a moment before moving on. The helm has a rim that curves outward at the front to form a short visor. Not a full visor like a knight's helm, but a simple projection that shades your eyes from sun and rain, and you can feel the edge of that rim now as a cool line of metal just above your forehead. The rim does not touch your skin, it hovers a finger's breadth away, but you are aware of its proximity, the way you are aware of a wall when you stand close to it, a sense of something solid and present that defines the boundary of your personal space. When the wind gusts outside and the thread of cold air finds its way through the arrow slit, the rim catches the draft and deflects it away from your eyes, and you feel the air curl around the metal and stream past your temples, a small service that the helm performs without being asked. The rim is slightly rough along its edge, where the smith's file left its marks, and you have run your thumb along that edge many times, feeling the tiny ridges and valleys, the texture of a thing made by hand rather than by mold. You imagine that the helm itself is listening, a silent bell of forged metal that gathers the faintest vibrations from the stone floor and transmits them directly into the bone behind your ear. This is not a fanciful thought, but a practical observation, because the old armsmaster taught you that sound travels faster and farther through solid things than through air, and the helm is a solid thing that rests on your head, which rests on your spine, which rests on the stool, which rests on the flagstones, which rest on the earth. In theory, a vibration in the ground, a distant hoofbeat or the rumble of a cartwheel on the road, would travel up through all those layers and reach your inner ear through the helm before you would ever hear it through the am. You have tested this theory on quiet nights by pressing your palm against the stone pillar and feeling for a tremor that never comes. And you have come to trust the principle, even though you have never had occasion to use it. The helm is an instrument of listening as much as a piece of armor, and you wear it with the quiet confidence that it will tell you what you need to know long before your ears do. The cold of the iron is a constant low note in the symphony of sensations, a temperature that is neither the deep cold of winter stone nor the neutral cool of water, but something in between, a metallic chill that has a quality all its own. Iron feels colder than other materials at the same temperature, a trick of conductivity that draws the heat out of your skin faster than wood or wool or leather, and you are grateful for the suspension straps that keep the metal from touching your scalp directly. The cold gathers most noticeably at the back of the helm, where the iron curves down to protect the nape of your neck, and you can feel it there as a cool crescent that sits just above the collar of your cloak, a spot that never warms no matter how long you wear it. The cold is not unpleasant, it is simply a fact, a property of the metal that is as constant as its weight or its color, and you accept it the way you accept the cold of the flagstones under your boots. Your breathing has slowed even further as you have sat here attending to the helm, the rhythm deepening and lengthening until each cycle takes many seconds to complete. The inhale is a slow drawing and that fills the bottom of your lungs first and then the top, a gradual expansion that you can feel in your ribs and your diaphragm and even in the small muscles of your lower back, and the exhale is a long letting go that empties you completely, leaving a pause at the end that is not a holding of breath, but a simple absence, a rest between movements. The echo inside the helm follows this rhythm faithfully, the soft shushing on the inhale and the muffled huff on the exhale, and the sound has become so integrated into your awareness that you no longer hear it as separate from the other night sounds. It is part of the same tapestry, the creak of the roof and the trickle of the culvert and the hiss of the candle and the breath inside the helm, all of them woven together into a single quiet fabric. You shift your weight slightly, and the helm moves with you, a small adjustment of angle that changes the acoustics slightly, the echo shifting from the left side of the metal to the right. The shift is subtle, a matter of a few degrees, but you notice it because you have been paying such close attention, and you let the new position settle before returning to your stillness. The stool creaks softly as you resettle, and the creak travels up through your spine and into your skull, where it briefly overlaps with the sound of your own pulse. A low thump that you feel rather than hear, and then the overlapping fades and the sounds separate again, each returning to its own rhythm. The interweaving of internal and external sounds is a phenomenon you have noticed many times before, the way the body's own noises blend with the noises of the world to create a single continuous stream of sensation, and you let the blending happen without trying to sort one from the other. The helm has a history that you carry with you, a story that is written not in words, but in the small marks and discolorations that cover its surface. There is a faint scratch on the left side, a thin line of bright metal that shows through the dark patina, the result of a branch catching you across the head during a patrol through the wood after a storm. You remember the branch, a broken limb of oak that swung down as you passed and scraped across the iron with a shriek that made you duck, and you remember the old arms-master examining the scratch afterward and saying that the helm had done its job, that a scratch on the iron was better than a scratch on the scalp. The scratch has since darkened to a deep grey, the raw iron oxidizing to match the surrounding patina, but it is still visible if you know where to look, and you know where to look even without a mirror, your fingers finding it by touch the way a blind person reads a familiar text. There is also a small dent on the crown, a shallow depression the size of a fingertip, the origin of which you do not know, because it was there when the helm was issued to you from the armory. The armorer who handed it to you said that the dent had been there for as long as anyone could remember, and that the helm had belonged to at least 3 other guards before you, and that the dent did not affect its strength or its fit. You accepted this explanation without question, and over the years you have come to regard the dent as a mark of continuity, a sign that you are part of a chain of wearers that stretches back into the past and will stretch forward into the future when you too have handed the helm back to the armory. The dent is a small mystery, a tiny unanswered question that does not need an answer, and you touch it sometimes during the long watches, pressing your thumb into the shallow depression and wondering about the man who wore it before you and the night when something fell on his head and left this mark. The helm is not polished. It has the dull, dark grey of iron that has been allowed to develop a natural patina, a surface that does not reflect the candlelight but absorbs it, the metal holding the warmth of the flame without giving it back as brightness. You have oiled the helm regularly over the years, rubbing it down with a cloth dipped in linseed oil to keep the rust at bay, and the oil has darkened the iron to a deep charcoal color that is almost black in the shadows. The oil has a smell of its own, a faint nutty scent that lingers on the metal and mingles with the smell of your hair and the wool of the suspension straps, a personal aroma that you would recognize anywhere as the smell of your own gear. The oil also makes the helm slightly tacky to the touch, a faint grit that you feel when you adjust the angle or run your fingers along the rim, and that tackiness is a familiar sensation, part of the texture of your duty. You consider the fact that the helm has been on your head for thousands of hours, that it has accompanied you through every watch and every patrol and every training session since you became a guard, and that it has never failed you. The thought is not sentimental, it is practical, the same way you might think about the reliability of a good tool or a well-made pair of boots. The helm is a thing that does its job without complaint, and you do your job while wearing it, and the relationship is one of mutual dependability, a quiet partnership that asks for nothing beyond the simple act of continuing. You will wear the helm until you are too old to stand a watch, and then you will hand it back to the armory, and someone else will wear it and sit on this stool and listen to their own breath echoing inside the same iron dome, and the chain will continue unbroken. The breath inside the helm continues its slow rhythm, in and out, the sound a soft companion that walks beside you through the long night, and you settle deeper into the stillness of the watch, with the helm on your head and the strap soft under your chin, and the cold iron, a steady presence against the crown of your skull, a listener to the sound of its own listening. A guard the gate with the simplest of all equipment, a body at rest in the helmet that has become, through long habit and spest, as much a part of the guard as money. Slowly, without urgency, your mind drifts back to the training yard on a hot afternoon many summers ago, the memory surfacing not as a sudden image, but as a gentle bloom that opens petal by petal until you are standing in the dust again with the sun hot on the back of your neck and the voice of the old arms master rolling across the trampled ground. The gatehouse around you does not disappear. You are still on the stool with the candle flickering on the ledge and the torch burning on the outer wall, but the present moment grows thin and transparent, a veil through which the past becomes visible, and you let yourself slip through that veil without resistance, the way a boat slips from a sunlit patch of river into the cool shadow of a bridge. The memory is a familiar one. You have returned to it many times during these long watches, and it always begins with the same details. The dry smell of packed earth, the distant clang of the smith's hammer from the armory, the way the heat shimmered above the wooden stockade and made the distant tower seem to float. The training yard was a rectangle of bare ground behind the armory, bordered on three sides by a high wooden stockade and on the fourth by the stone wall of the barracks. The stockade was made of oak posts driven deep into the earth and sharpened at the tops, a solid barrier that blocked the wind and kept the dust from blowing away, and its surface was grey and weathered, the grain of the wood raised by years of rain and sun so that it felt rough as a file under your palm. You remember the way the stockade cast a long shadow in the late afternoon, a band of cool darkness that crept across the yard as the sun sank, and how you and the other boys would gravitate toward that shadow when the arms master called a rest, pressing your backs against the wood and feeling the residual warmth stored in the fibers. The stockade was not just a fence, it was a boundary between the world of training and the world beyond, and you spent countless hours in its presence, learning the lessons that would carry you through a lifetime of watches. The old arms master was a man whose age was impossible to determine, his face a map of deep lines that could have been 50 years old or 70, his hair a grizzled grey that stuck out from under the rim of his leather cap like the straw from a thatch roof. He had a voice like gravel rolling in a wooden bucket, low and rough and endlessly patient, and he never raised it, not even when the youngest boys fumbled their sword grips or dropped their shields in the dust. He would simply repeat the same lessons over and over until they sank into your bones, not through force but through sheer gentle persistence, the way water wears a groove in stone by flowing over it for 1,000 years. He had been a guard himself in his younger days, stationed at this very gatehouse, and he carried the quiet authority of a man who had done everything he taught, who had stood the long watches and walked the dark roads and listened to the same silence you were listening to now. On that particular hot afternoon, the arms master had gathered the trainees in a semicircle near the stockade, his back to the sun, so that the boys faced the shadow and could see him without squinting. He was holding a wooden training sword in one hand, the tip resting on the ground, and he was speaking about sound, about the way a guard must learn to listen, not just with his ears, but with his whole body. You remember his exact words because he said them so often that they became a kind of chants, a rhythm that you could recite in your sleep. Sound travels faster through solid things than through air, he said. The words, slow and deliberate, each syllable given its full weight. The earth will tell you what your ears cannot, if you know how to feel it. A hoofbeat a mile away, a boot on the road, the wheel of a cart coming up from the village, all of these things send a shiver through the ground that reaches you long before the noise reaches your ears. You must learn to read that shiver, to feel it in your feet and in your bones, to trust it more than you trust your eyes or your hearing. The arms master then gestured toward the stockade, and you remember how the boys turned to look at the grey wood as if seeing it for the first time. He walked to the wall and pressed his palm flat against it. His gnarled fingers splayed wide, and he told one of the older boys to go around to the far side and walk along the fence. The boy disappeared around the corner, and for a moment there was only the buzz of a fly in the dust and the distant hammer from the armory, and then the arms master beckoned you forward. You specifically, the youngest of the group, the one who had only been training for a few weeks and still felt out of place among the older lads. You stepped up to the stockade and he told you to press your ear against the wood, to close your eyes and listen not with your ears but with the bones of your skull. And you did as you were told, feeling the rough grain against your cheek and the warmth of the sun-baked wood and the faint tremor of the earth beneath your feet. For a long moment there was nothing, just the darkness behind your closed eyelids and the smell of the wood and the sound of your own breath. And then you felt it, a faint rhythmic thud that traveled through the stockade and into your skull. A sensation more than a sound, a low and regular pulse that matched the pace of a walking man. The boy on the far side was pacing back and forth, his boots striking the packed earth with each step, and the vibration of those steps was traveling up through the posts and across the boards and into the bone behind your ear, just as the arms master had said it would. You could hear the footsteps too, distantly the soft crunch of gravel under the boy's feet, but the vibration through the wood arrived a fraction of a second earlier, a silent herald that announced the sound before the sound itself appeared. The demonstration felt like a small magic trick, a secret door that opened onto a hidden world, and you pulled your ear away from the stockade and looked at the arms master with what must have been an expression of pure wonder. The old man nodded, his creased face breaking into the faintest suggestion of a smile, and he said that you would never forget this lesson, that it would stay with you long after you forgot the names of the sword forms and the ranks of the officers, and he was right. That afternoon in the training yard planted itself in your memory like a seed that has grown slowly over the years, its roots spreading through every watch and every patrol and every quiet moment of listening in the dark. The arms master taught you many other things in the years that followed, how to stand still for hours without locking your knees, how to breathe so that your breath would not fog the cold air and give away your position, how to read the stars and the wind and the behavior of the birds. But the lesson of the stockade was the foundation upon which all the others were built. Sound travels faster through solid things than through air, and the earth will tell you what your ears cannot, and all you have to do is pay attention. Now, in the deep stillness of the gatehouse, you apply that same principle to the stone floor beneath your feet. The memory fades as gently as it came, the training yard dissolving back into the darkness of the past, the voice of the arms master retreating into the quiet storehouse of your mind where it lives alongside the voices of your parents and the songs you sang as a child, and the sound of the blacksmith's hammer and all the other auditory relics of a life. The stockade is gone, the hot sun is gone, the boy walking on the far side of the fence is gone, but the lesson remains, as fresh and as useful as it was on that afternoon many summers ago, and you find yourself shifting your weight slightly on the stool to bring your left foot more fully into contact with the flagstone beneath you. The stone is cold through the sole of your boot, a dense and ancient cold that has nothing to do with the temperature of the air and everything to do with the nature of stone itself, a material that holds the chill of the earth like a bowl holds water. Your boot is made of thick leather with a double sole, layers of cowhide stitched together with waxed thread and studded with small iron nails at the heel and toe, and between the stone and your skin there are these layers of leather and wool and the calloused flesh of your foot, a series of barriers that dampen sensation and protect you from the worst of the cold. Yet even through all those layers you can feel the solidity of the flagstone, its unyielding presence, its refusal to give or bend or shift, a constancy that has been there since the stone was laid and will be there long after you are gone. You press down slightly, not hard, just a small increase in pressure, and the stone does not move. It has not moved for 400 years, and that certainty travels up through your leg and into your spine. You close your eyes, not because the darkness behind your eyelids is any different from the darkness in the room, but because closing your eyes helps you turn your attention inward, toward the subtle language of vibration and pressure that the old arms master taught you to read. With your eyes shut, you become a single point of contact between the stool and the floor, your right foot hooked on the lower rung of the stool and your left foot flat on the flagstone, and you wait, breathing slowly, listening with your whole body the way you were taught. The culvert beneath the wall continues its soft murmur. The mouse in the thatch stirs briefly. The torch on the outer wall hisses as a bead of resin drips into the flame. And beneath all these sounds, beneath the audible world entirely, there is the deep subterranean hum of the earth itself, settling into the long night. The hum is not a sound you can hear with your ears. It is too low and too vast for that, a vibration that lives below the threshold of hearing and registers instead as a faint pressure against the soles of your feet and a subtle tingling in the bones of your legs. The old arms master said that the earth is never truly still, that it trembles with the weight of its own turning and the pull of the moon and the movement of water through its deep veins, and over the years you have come to believe him. The hum is always there, a continuous background thrum that you normally filter out the way you filter out the sound of your own heartbeat, but when you sit quietly and turn your attention to it, it emerges from the background and becomes the foreground, the foundational note upon which all the other sounds are built. It is a comfort, this deep vibration, a reminder that the world is alive and turning, and that your small watch is part of a much larger rhythm that has been going on since the earth was formed, and will continue long after the gatehouse crumbles to dust. You feel for any tremor that might mean a hoof or a boot far down the road, any interruption in the steady hum that would signal the approach of something that does not belong to the night. You press your left foot down a little harder, feeling the flagstone's unyielding resistance, and you imagine the road stretching away into the darkness, a long ribbon of packed earth that could carry the vibration of a horse's hoof or a marching foot or the iron rim of a cartwheel. If anyone were walking on that road even at a great distance, the impact of their steps would travel through the ground and up through the stone and into your foot, a rhythmic pulse that would stand out against the steady background hum the way a drum beat stands out against a sustained organ note. You have felt such pulses before, not at night, but during the day when carts come up from the village with grain or wool or firewood. The slow thud, thud, thud of the horses' hooves arriving through the ground a moment before the sound of the cartwheels reaches your ears. But tonight there is nothing. Only the deep and continuous hum, a silence beneath the silence, an absence where an interruption might have been. You open your eyes, and the chamber returns. The candle still burning, the horn still on its bracket, the abandoned cloak still hanging from its peg, everything as it was before you closed your eyes. The world has not changed, the road is still empty, the gate is still closed, the night is still doing what nights do, and you feel the calm certainty that the old arms master was right, that the lesson of the stockade was a true lesson, that you have learned how to wait and how to listen and how to trust the quiet language of the earth. The enemy that might come remains an idea so distant it cannot disturb the steady field of your attention, a hypothetical shape that has never materialized in all your years of watching and will not materialize tonight, because the earth would have told you if it were coming, and the earth has said nothing. You shift your weight back to an even distribution, both feet resting lightly on the stool's rung, and the hum recedes into the background where it belongs, no longer the focus of your attention but still present, still there, a constant companion that will stay with you until you stand up and walk down the stairs and leave the gatehouse to the morning light. The memory of the training yard has faded completely now. The old arms master's face has blurred back into the general wash of remembered faces. His voice has merged with the other voices in the storehouse of your mind. But the lesson remains, not as a memory, but as a reflex. Something you do without thinking. The way you breathe without thinking, or shift your weight on the stool without thinking. Sound travels faster through solid things than through air, and the earth will tell you what your ears cannot, and all you have to do is pay attention, and you have been paying attention for so long that the attention has become a kind of rest, a quiet vigilance that requires no effort and no strain, simply the patient presence of the body on a stool in the deep middle of the night. The torch on the outer wall flickers and pops. The culvert continues its murmur. The candle burns steadily downward, and you sit with the old lessons remembered and the present moment held lightly in your awareness. A guard who has been taught how to wait and has been waiting ever since. A listener placed at the threshold like a stone in a stream, as patient and as silent as the stones themselves. You have listened to the creak of the roof and the scurry of the mouse. You have watched the torch on the wall and walked the road in your mind. You have felt the breath inside your helm and remembered the old lessons of the training yard. And now the night has reached a depth where time itself seems to slow to a near standstill, a long plateau of darkness that stretches between the midnight hour and the first hint of dawn. In this deep part of the watch, the small activities that occupied your attention earlier have receded into the background, not gone but settled, like the sediment in a glass of water that has been left undisturbed. What remains is a spacious stillness that asks for nothing, and into that stillness a new rhythm enters, a rhythm so simple and so ancient that it feels less like something you do and more like something that does itself. A counting that begins without your having decided to count. The sound that draws you into this quiet reckoning is the slow drip of water falling from the mossy lip of the culvert beneath the wall. You've been aware of this sound all night, a distant liquid note that never quite stops, but now it separates itself from the general murmur and becomes distinct, each drop a small clear event that stands out against the larger silence, the way a single star stands out against the hazy wash of the Milky Way. The drops do not fall at perfectly regular intervals. There is a slight variation in the timing, a pause that stretches a little longer after every fourth or fifth drop, a tiny hesitation caused by the way the water gathers on the moss before its weight overcomes the surface tension and it lets go. This irregularity is what makes the counting possible, because a perfectly regular beat would lull you into a trance where the numbers lose their meaning, but the slight variation keeps your attention lightly engaged, a feather touch of awareness that rests on each drop as it falls. You begin to count the intervals between the drops, not the drops themselves but the spaces between them, the short silences that separate one liquid note from the next. The numbers unspool in your mind without effort. One, then another, a slow metronome that marks the passing of something that is not quite time but feels like it. A measurement that has no unit and no scale and no purpose beyond the simple act of measuring. You do not count with words, not exactly. The numbers are more like impressions, the shape of a 1 or a 2 or a 3 that passes through your awareness and fades, leaving no trace, no cumulative total that you are keeping track of. The counting is not a task, it is a way of being present, a gentle tether that holds your attention to the moment without gripping it tightly, and you let it carry you forward into the long, slow current of the hour. After some time, you realize that you have lost track of where you were, the number 40-something having dissolved into a vague sense of quantity that has no fixed boundary. The realization does not trouble you. There is no failure in losing count because there was no goal to begin with. The counting was simply a rhythm, and rhythms are meant to be entered and left without ceremony. You start again from 1, or perhaps from somewhere near 1. It does not matter. And the new count begins with the same gentle quality as the old one, the drops and the numbers and the silences weaving together into a pattern that is always the same and always slightly different. The repetition is not monotonous, it is meditative. A slow circling that deepens with each pass, the way a path through a forest deepens each time a walker steps on the same spot. The counting merges with the other rhythms of the gatehouse, the pulse of your blood against the stone pillar, and the flicker of the candle on the ledge, and the soft shushing of the torch on the outer wall. All of these periodic events converging into a single composite rhythm that you no longer feel the need to separate into its parts. You become aware that you are counting the drops and the pulse and the flicker all at once, or rather that they are all counting themselves, the numbers flowing through them as easily as water flows through the culvert, and the distinction between the counter and the counted begins to blur. You are not a person counting drops. You are part of a system of rhythms that includes the drops and the pulse and the flicker and the breath and the slow turn of the stars, a single continuous vibration that has no center and no edge. A chord that has been sounding since the beginning of the night and will resolve only when the sun appears. The sense of separation that normally defines your experience, the feeling of being a person inside a body, inside a room, inside a gatehouse, grows thin and porous, not in a way that is frightening or strange, but in a way that is deeply peaceful, like the feeling of drifting off to sleep without actually sleeping. You are still awake, your eyes are still open, you can feel the stool beneath you and the cold of the flagstone under your boot, but the boundaries between you and the things around you have softened. the way the boundaries between colors soften in a fog. The drip of the culvert is not outside you. It is part of the same field of awareness that includes your thoughts and your breath and the faint ache behind your knees, and the numbers that you are counting are not separate from the drops they count. They are the same event seen from different angles. This merging of subject and object is not something you have sought out or practiced. It is simply what happens when a person sits still for long enough in a quiet place. The natural settling of the mind into its surroundings, the way a stone settles into the bed of a stream. The old arms master never spoke of this directly, but you suspect he knew about it, because he often said that the best guard is the one who forgets he is guarding, who becomes so much a part of the gate that the gate guards itself. You did not understand what he meant when you were young. The words seemed like a riddle, a piece of old man wisdom that sounded profound but had no practical application. Now, after years of sitting on this stool and watching this darkness and listening to these sounds, you understand it completely, not as an idea, but as a lived reality that has seeped into your bones through sheer repetition, the way the cold of the flagstone seeps through the leather of your boots. The counting continues, or perhaps it has stopped. It is difficult to tell the difference anymore, because the rhythm has become so internalized that it happens on its own, a silent pulse that runs beneath your conscious awareness like the deep hum of the earth beneath the flagstones. You are no longer counting the drops are counting themselves through you, and you are simply the space in which the counting occurs, an open room through which the night flows unimpeded. The thought of the enemy whose footsteps you are listening for passes across this open space like a cloud across the moon, visible for a moment and then gone, leaving no shadow. The gate remains closed, the road remains empty, the counting continues, and the stillness that surrounds you is so complete that it has become a physical substance, a clear and weightless medium in which you float suspended. Time in this state does not pass in the usual way. It does not pass at all. It simply is, a continuous present that has no before and no after, only an endless, now that stretches in all directions like the dark countryside beyond the gate. You could not say how long you have been sitting here, whether it has been 5 minutes or 50, because the clock that measures such things has been absorbed into the larger rhythm of the night, its ticking replaced by the drip of the culvert, and its hands replaced by the slow migration of the stars. The candle on the ledge has burned down another fraction of an inch, and the pool of wax around its base has widened, and these are signs that time has passed in the external world. But in the internal world where you are currently residing there is no time, only presence, only the ongoing flow of drops and breaths and pulse beats that have no need to be measured. The owl calls again from the wood beyond the barley field. 4 hoots and a pause. 4 hoots and a pause, and the sound enters your awareness without disturbing it. A small stone dropped into a still pond that sends out ripples which spread and fade and leave the surface as smooth as it was before. The owl's rhythm matches the rhythm of the culvert almost exactly, or perhaps it only seems that way because everything in the night has synchronized into a single cadence, the living and the non-living, the animal and the mineral, the breathing and the dripping, all of them moving to the same slow beat that has been beating since the earth cooled and the first water fell and the first creature called out in the dark. You are part of that beat, a single note in a chord that stretches from the stars to the center of the earth, and the recognition of this is not a thought but a sensation, a deep and wordless knowing that has no need to be articulated. Your body remains exactly where it was, the left foot flat on the flagstone and the right heel hooked on the stool's lower rung, the hands resting on your thighs with the palms turned slightly upward, the spine curved just enough to rest the shoulder blades against the cold stone wall without pressing hard. The posture has not changed, and yet your relationship to it has changed. Because you are no longer a person maintaining a posture, you are the posture itself, the shape of a seated guard that has been held by this stool and this wall and this floor for so long that the distinction between the man and the position has dissolved. The ache behind your knees is still there. The cold of the flagstone is still there. The weight of the helm is still there. But these sensations no longer belong to you in the way they did. They are simply sensations that exist in the same field of awareness as the drip of the culvert and the flicker of the candle, equidistant from the empty center that you have become. The counting surfaces again, or perhaps it never stopped. a gentle current of numbers that flows just below the threshold of attention. One drop falls from the mossy lip, a single bead of water that gathers on the edge of a stone and hangs there for a long moment before letting go. A pause follows, long enough that you begin to wonder if the next drop will ever come. Then it comes, a second beat, and you mark it with a number 2, a silent syllable that passes through your mind and vanishes. The third drop falls sooner than you expected, catching you slightly off guard, and the number 3 arrives a fraction of a second late, a small lag that makes you aware of the gap between the event and your perception of the event, a gap that is usually invisible but that becomes visible in the stillness. The fourth drop is perfectly timed, the number arriving simultaneously with the sound, and the synchrony feels like a small completion, a circle closing, a rhythm finding its balance. By the time you reach 7, you have already forgotten where you started, the numbers having no cumulative meaning, only the momentary meaning of the present count. 7 is not a quantity of drops. It is simply the shape of this particular moment, the feel of the number 7 as it occupies your awareness and then yields to 8. 8 is different from 7 in a way that is difficult to describe. It is rounder, more balanced, a number that sits comfortably in the mind like a stone that fits perfectly in the palm of your hand. 9 is sharper, more angular, a number that points forward to 10 without quite reaching it. 10 is a resting place, a small plateau where the counting could stop without feeling incomplete. But you do not stop. You continue on to 11 and 12 and 13. The numbers losing their individual characters and becoming a smooth stream that flows without interruption. Somewhere after 20, the numbers dissolve into pure rhythm, the names falling away and leaving only the pulse, the beat, the steady throb of attention meeting event and releasing it. You are no longer counting, you are being counted, the drops marking you as surely as you are marking them, a mutual exchange of presence that has no beginning and no end. The culvert drips, the heart beats, the candle flickers, the stars turn, and the counting continues without a counter, a self-sustaining cycle that will go on long after you have stood up and walked down the stairs and left the gatehouse to the morning. The gate remains closed, the road remains empty, the enemy that might come remains an idea so distant it cannot disturb the steady field of attention, and you remain exactly where you are supposed to be, a listener who has become the listening, a guard who has become the guarding, a single point of stillness in a world of quiet motion. The torch on the outer wall hisses as a fresh bead of resin boils into the flame, and the sound draws you back from the deeper reaches of the stillness, not abruptly, but gently, the way a hand on your shoulder might draw you back from a dream. You are still on the stool, still in the gatehouse, still wearing the helm and the cloak and the boots, and the chamber around you is exactly as it was. The soot-blackened ceiling and the horn on its bracket and the abandoned cloak on its peg. Everything in its place. The counting recedes into the background where it will continue on its own, a quiet undercurrent that you can return to whenever you wish, and you blink once, slowly, feeling the slight moisture of your eyelids as they close and open. The night is still deep, the dawn is still far away, and there is nothing to do except continue. The counting and the listening and the watching and the stillness all blending together into a single seamless act of presence that asks for nothing and expects nothing and receives exactly what it needs. Through the arrow slit, the narrow rectangle of sky that you have glanced at from time to time throughout the watch has changed its character so gradually that the change is only now becoming apparent, a shift so subtle that it might have been happening for hours without your conscious notice. When you first sat down on the stool and settled into the stillness, the patch of sky visible through the stone opening was a deep and uniform blue-black, a darkness indistinguishable from the darkness of the chamber itself, and the stars that slowly emerged were scattered across the opening without any pattern that you could name. Now, as you turn your head with the slow deliberation of someone who has no reason to hurry, you see that the stars have rearranged themselves into a new configuration. Not because the stars themselves have moved, but because the great wheel of the earth has turned beneath them, carrying the gatehouse and the road and the barley field and the wood through the silent degrees of the night. The constellation that you noticed earlier, the one the old arms master called the wagon, has travelled from the center of the arrow slit to a point near the upper edge. its four corner stars forming a rectangle that is now tilted at a slightly different angle than it was when you first identified it. The shaft of the wagon, a line of 3 stars that curves away from one corner of the rectangle, now points almost directly upward rather than toward the north, and the whole pattern has compressed slightly, the stars appearing closer together as they approach the edge of the opening, a foreshortening effect that you have observed many times before. You watch this migration with the detached curiosity of someone who has seen it 100 times and will see it 100 more, a quiet confirmation that the night is proceeding as nights always proceed, the great celestial clockwork turning with a precision that needs no winding and no correction. The wagon is not the only constellation visible through the narrow window. There are other stars scattered across the rectangle, fainter points of light that you have never bothered to name because the old arms master never named them for you. He taught you the wagon because it is the easiest to find, and because its position in the sky tells you the hour if you know how to read it. A skill that he passed on to you in the same patient voice he used for all his lessons. The wagon at midnight sits low in the southern sky, its shaft pointing roughly toward the horizon, and by the 3rd hour of the watch it has climbed to the middle of its arc, and by the 5th hour it has passed the zenith and begun its descent toward the west. And by dawn it has sunk so low that it vanishes into the grey wash of morning light. You know all of this without having to think about it, the way you know the number of steps from the gate to the milestone or the number of studs on the gate door, a knowledge that has been absorbed through years of watching and waiting and paying quiet attention. Now as you sit in the deep stillness of the later watch, you can see that the wagon has climbed past the center of the arrow slit and is pressing against the upper edge, the topmost star of the rectangle already partially obscured by the stone merlin that frames the opening. In another hour, perhaps less, the entire constellation will have passed out of view, and the rectangle of sky will be filled with a different set of stars, the ones that follow the wagon across the night. Their names unknown to you, and their patterns unnamed. A new arrangement of light that will itself shift and fade as the night progresses. The thought of the wagon disappearing does not trouble you. It is simply the way of things, a predictable event in a world of predictable events, and you note it with the same mild interest that you might note the candle burning down to its next mark, or the torch on the outer wall sinking lower in its sconce. The sky visible through the arrow slit is not entirely black anymore, though the change is so faint that you might be imagining it. At the very bottom of the rectangle, where the opening meets the horizon, there is a supple lightening of the darkness, a dilution of the black into a deep charcoal that is not yet grey but is no longer pure night. This is the first hint of the dawn that is still hours away, a suggestion of light that travels ahead of the sun like a herald riding before a king. And you know that it will grow slowly and steadily until the whole eastern sky is washed with a pale gold that will eventually overcome the stars. For now, it is only a faint presence at the edge of your vision, a barely perceptible shift in the quality of the darkness that you can see only when you look at it indirectly, the way you see a faint star better when you look slightly to the side of it rather than directly at it. The cold has deepened enough that you draw your cloak a fraction tighter, a motion so slight it barely disturbs the pool of stillness you have built around yourself. Your left hand rises from your thigh and takes hold of the edge of the wool, pulling it across your chest by no more than an inch, and your right hand does the same on the other side, the two movements coordinated without thought, a small adjustment that your body has made 1,000 times on 1,000 cold nights. The wool slides across your shoulders and settles into a new arrangement, trapping a fresh layer of warm air close to your skin, and you feel the immediate small comfort of the added insulation. The way the cold that had been pressing against your upper arms recedes and is replaced by a gentle warmth. The cloak is old and patched in several places, the wool felted in some spots and thin in others, but it still does its work, holding the heat of your body and keeping the chill of the stone at a distance. And you are grateful for it in the same quiet way. You are grateful for the stool and the candle and the solid presence of the gate beneath you. The new arrangement of wool and limb settles into place as naturally as water finding its level, and you become aware of the way the cloak's weight distributes itself across your shoulders. A familiar pressure that is neither heavy nor light, but exactly what you expect. The hem of the cloak pulls on the flagstones around your feet, a soft puddle of fabric that traps the warmth of your legs and keeps the cold of the floor from creeping upward, and you can feel the slight difference in temperature between the air inside the cloak and the air outside, a microclimate that you carry with you wherever you sit. The hood of the cloak is thrown back. You almost never raise it, because the helm occupies the space where the hood would sit, but its extra layer of wool lies bunched behind your neck. A cushion between the iron rim of the helm and the hard stone wall, a small padding that you appreciate without having thought to arrange it. The cold has a smell of its own, a clean and empty scent that comes through the arrow slit along with the thin thread of moving air, the smell of frost forming on the barley stubble and the bare branches of the oak and the stones of the road. It is a sharp smell, slightly metallic, the kind of smell that makes you think of ice even when there is no ice to be seen. And it carries with it the promise of a white morning, a dusting of hoarfrost that will coat every surface and sparkle when the sun finally rises. You breathe in the cold air and feel it sting the inside of your nostrils, a brief sharpness that wakes you up just enough to notice that you were drifting, and then you breathe out and watch the small cloud of condensation form and vanish, a tiny ghost that marks the boundary between your living warmth and the cold of the world outside. The stars continue their slow procession, the wagon pressing ever closer to the top edge of the arrow slit, and you follow its progress without urgency, letting the movement fill your awareness the way the counting filled it earlier. There is a rhythm to the stars, not a rhythm you can hear, but a rhythm you can feel. A vast and ponderous beat that measures the turning of the earth and the wheeling of the heavens, and you are part of that rhythm whether you want to be or not. You cannot stop the stars from moving any more than you can stop the culvert from dripping or the torch from burning. You can only watch and wait and let the great wheel turn, carrying you with it toward the dawn that waits somewhere beyond the eastern horizon. The feeling of being carried is not unpleasant. It is like the feeling of floating on a slow river, the current so gentle that you barely know you are moving, and you surrender to it without resistance, letting the night carry you where it will. The constellation is at the very top of the arrow slit now, its lowest star still visible, but its highest star already gone, hidden behind the stone, and the remaining stars seem to cling to the edge of the opening as if reluctant to leave. You watch the brightest of them, the one at the corner of the rectangle, a steady white point of light that has not flickered or wavered all night. And you think about the distance between yourself and that star, a distance so vast that it cannot be measured in miles or leagues, but only in the time it takes light to travel, a time so long that the light you are seeing now left the star before the Gatehouse was built, before the road was laid, before the first person walked across this valley and gave it a name. The thought is too large to hold on to. It slides away from your mind like water sliding off a waxed cloth, leaving behind only a faint impression of immensity, a sense of scale that makes your own small watch seem even smaller and even quieter. A single moment in a vast and ongoing night. The sky beyond the arrow slit continues to lighten almost imperceptibly, the deep charcoal at the bottom of the rectangle spreading upward by degrees, diluting the black into a softer shade that has no name because it exists only in this brief interval between night and dawn. The stars near the horizon have already begun to fade, their light overwhelmed by the growing brightness, and soon the fainter stars higher up will follow, winking out one by one until only the brightest remain, solitary points of light that hold on until the very last moment before the sun takes the sky. You have watched this fading many times, standing on the wall walk or sitting on this stool, and it always strikes you as a gentle process, a soft extinguishing that happens without drama, the stars simply withdrawing into the blue that will soon become the blue of day. The cold has intensified in the last hour, the temperature dropping to its lowest point just before the dawn, and you can feel it in your fingers and your toes and the tip of your nose, a cold that is not painful but present, a steady reminder that your body is a warm thing in a cold world. You tuck your hands into the opposite sleeves of your cloak, crossing your arms over your chest, and the wool wraps around your fingers with a familiar roughness, the fibers tickling your knuckles and trapping the heat of your palms. The position is one you have assumed 1,000 times, a guard's posture of patient waiting, and it shifts the weight of your upper body slightly forward. enough that the stool creaks once in response, a small sound that fades almost before you notice it. Your legs have grown stiff from the long sitting, the ache behind your knees now a dull and steady presence that has become part of the landscape of your body, no more remarkable than the cold of the flagstone or the weight of the helm. You know that the stiffness will dissolve the moment you stand up and walk down the stairs, that your muscles will warm and loosen with the first few steps, and the knowledge makes the stiffness easier to bear, a temporary condition that will resolve itself in due time. You do not shift your legs or try to find a more comfortable position, because the position you're in is the position you have been in for hours, and it seems pointless to change it now, so close to the end of the watch. So you remain as you are, a still figure in a still room, waiting for the first grey light that will signal the approach of your relief. The wagon has now disappeared completely, the last of its stars having slipped behind the stone merlin, and the rectangle of sky is filled with a new set of fainter stars that you do not recognize as a pattern. These stars are the late-night stars, the ones that appear only in the hours after midnight and fade before dawn, the names unknown to you and their mythology unlearned, and they glitter in the darkening sky with a quiet beauty that asks for nothing, not even to be seen. You watch them without trying to identify them, letting them be what they are, points of light in a vast darkness, and the simplicity of the observation is a kind of rest, a final quiet moment before the night begins its slow retreat. The first hint of grey has now become a definite presence at the bottom of the arrow slit, a pale wash that is still not light but is no longer dark, a transition zone where the black of night gives way to the colourless dawn. The grey is the colour of a dove's wing, or the belly of a fish, a soft and muted tone that contains within it the promise of the blue and gold that will follow, and you watch it spread slowly upward, erasing the last of the horizon stars, and then the stars above them, a gentle tide of light that rises without hurry. The process is so slow that you cannot see it happening, you can only see that it has happened. The grey a little higher than it was a moment ago, a little brighter, a little more like morning, and a little less like night. The owl in the wood has fallen silent, its territorial calls having ceased sometime in the last hour, and the mouse in the thatch has not stirred for a long while, and even the culvert seems to be dripping more slowly, as if the whole world is holding its breath in anticipation of the dawn. The silence is not an empty silence, it is a full silence, a silence that contains within it all the sounds that have been and all the sounds that have been, the memory of the night and the promise of the day. You sit within that silence as within a great hall, a single listener in a vast and quiet cathedral of stone and sky, and the peace of it settles into you with the same slow gravity that has governed every moment of this watch. Nothing is changed and nothing will change, and that is the great comfort of this hour. The road is still empty, the gate is still closed, the enemy has not come and will not come, and the watch has been exactly what every watch before it has been, a long and patient waiting that asks for nothing but presents and rewards nothing but peace. The stars have shifted and the cold has deepened and the grey light has grown, and through it all you have remained on your stool with your cloak drawn tight and your helm on your head and your hands tucked into your sleeves, a guard who has guarded nothing but the quiet of the night, and who has found in that quiet a rest deeper than any sleep. Long before any rooster crows in the village behind the gate, long before the first cartwheel creaks on the road, or the first wisp of smoke rises from a cottage chimney, there is a subtle lightening of the darkness that is not quite colour, a dilution of the black into a deep charcoal that you sense more than see. The change has been gathering at the bottom edge of the arrow slit for some time now, a slow accumulation of grey that has spread upward through the narrow rectangle of sky until the stars that were so bright an hour ago have begun to fade, their light absorbed by the growing brightness that is still not light but is no longer dark. You have been watching this transformation without watching it, the way you watch the candle burn down or the torch sink lower in its sconce, a gradual shift that registers in your awareness only after it has already happened. And now you turn your head slightly on the stool and let the grey wash fill your vision, a soft and muted tone that contains within it the promise of the blue and gold that will follow. The wagon has long since disappeared beyond the upper edge of the arrow slit, and the fainter stars that followed it across the night have faded one by one, their light no match for the slow tide of dawn that rises from the eastern horizon. Only a single bright star remains visible, hanging in the very center of the opening like a drop of molten silver, and you watch it with the quiet attention of someone who has been watching stars all night and knows that this is the last one, the final point of light that will hold on until the very last moment before the sun takes the sky. The star does not flicker. It burns with a steady white radiance that seems to gather strength as the sky around it brightens, a small defiance that you find yourself admiring in a distant and impersonal way, the way you might admire a flower that grows through a crack in a stone wall. The cold has reached its deepest point, the temperature dropping in the hour before dawn to a chill that penetrates even the thick wool of your cloak and the leather of your boots and the felted padding inside your helm. Your breath fogs in front of your lips with each exhale, a small cloud that hangs in the still air for a moment before vanishing, and you can feel the cold on the tip of your nose and the edges of your ears and the knuckles of your fingers where they emerge from the sleeves of your cloak. The cold is not painful, it is simply present, a steady and pervasive fact that has been with you all night and will remain with you until you stand up and move your body and get the blood flowing again, and you accept it without resistance, the way you accept the weight of the helm and the hardness of the stool and the slow passage of the hours. The owl in the wood has been silent for a long while now, its territorial calls having ceased sometime in the deep part of the night when the stars were still bright and the darkness was still complete, and the mouse in the thatch has not stirred since you last heard it, and even the culvert beneath the wall seems to have slowed its dripping, the intervals between drops growing longer as the night winds down toward its end. The silence that fills the gatehouse now is different from the silence of midnight. It is a silence that expects to be broken, a held breath that waits for the first sound of the waking world, and you sit within that expectant silence with the patience of someone who has been waiting all night and can wait a little longer, the final minutes of the watch stretching out before you like the last few steps of a long journey. The torch on the outer wall has burned down to a stub, its flame reduced from the tall orange tongue of the earlier hours to a small blue flicker that licks at the charred wood and throws barely enough light to illuminate the gate door below. The amber pool that once spread across the oak planks and the iron studs has shrunk to a dim circle no larger than your hand, and the crossbar and the hinges and the lower portion of the arch have retreated back into the shadow from which they emerged hours ago. The smell of burning pitch has faded too, replaced by the clean, cold scent of the approaching dawn, a smell that carries the frost from the barley field and the damp stone of the wall, and the distant promise of wood smoke from the village chimneys that will soon be lit. You breathe in the cold air and feel it sting the inside of your nostrils, a brief sharpness that is almost refreshing after the long hours of still and smoky warmth, and you let the sensation mark the transition from one phase of the watch to the next. The ache behind your knees has grown from a mild presence into a definite discomfort, a dull and steady pressure that reminds you that your body has been motionless for many hours and will soon need to move. The ache is not unbearable, it is simply the body's way of letting you know that it has done its work and is ready to rest, and you shift your weight slightly on the stool to relieve the pressure, feeling the creak of the wood and the scrape of your boots on the flagstone, small sounds that seem loud in the expectant silence. Your shoulders are stiff from the cold and the long sitting, and you roll them once, a slow rotation that produces a soft pop somewhere near your left shoulder blade, and the pop is satisfying in a small way, a release of tension that has been building without your notice. You settle back into the stool with your body arranged slightly differently, the left foot now flat on the floor and the right heel resting on the toe of your boot, and the new position is just as comfortable as the old one. Or just as uncomfortable, it is difficult to tell the difference anymore. The grey at the arrow slit has continued its slow advance, the deep charcoal giving way to a paler shade that is definitely grey and not black, a soft dove-coloured light that has spread across the entire rectangle of sky and erased the last of the stars. The single bright star that was hanging in the centre of the opening has faded now, its light absorbed by the growing brightness, and the sky is empty of anything except the smooth and featureless grey that precedes the sunrise. You know that this grey is the same grey that you have seen 1,000 times from this stool, and from the wall walk, and from the road, and from every other vantage point in your small domain. A grey that is as familiar as the grain of the gate door, or the curve of the arch, or the sound of the culvert, and you watch it with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has made it through another night, and will soon be relieved of duty. The first bird call of the morning reaches you through